Okay, we are live. Commissioner Lumley.
Thank you. Good to see you all tonight. Welcome to the 8th meeting of the Independent District Commission. Commissioners and members of the public are welcome. Today is Wednesday, May 31st, and we will be here from 6 to 9 p.m. By Zoom and in person at the Portland Building downtown. Before we get started, I'll pass it off to the city staff to go over the Zoom meeting logistics.
Thank you. Sorry, I lost my mute button there for a second. Okay, hello everyone. I'm just going to take a moment to go over our Zoom logistics. This meeting is being recorded for later viewing. A copy of this recording will be posted on the IDC's website. For today's meeting, we have closed captioning, ASL, and Spanish interpretation available. To access Spanish interpretation, please click on the globe icon at the bottom right of your screen and select Spanish. And to access closed captioning, click on the CC button on the bottom right of your screen. Commissioners, this is your reminder to please change your Zoom chat setting to everyone so folks listening along can follow along with your conversation. And then lastly, community members listening in, we have the Zoom Q&A on the bottom left of your Zoom panel. Please feel free to put any questions or comments there. We may not be able to answer all the questions during today's meeting, but they will become part of the meeting record. At today's meeting, we will not be taking verbal public comment as it's a work session, but you can always submit public comments through our public comment form online or on our website by emailing districtcommission@portlandoregon.gov. And with that, I'll pass it back to your co-chairs.
Thank you, Sophia. The primary purpose of tonight's meeting is to vote on the maps that we're going to release to the public hearings in July. For the agenda today, we'll begin with working on our commission business and spend some time reviewing updated versions of the sample maps that we started coalescing around at our last meeting. Flow Analytics will present us with updated maps, and they will be ready to make live revisions to the maps as needed. During the sample map discussion, we will also spend time going over map rationales. After that, we'll take a quick break and spend the last hour of our meeting talking about community engagement and preparing for the public hearings. I'd like to pass it over to Co-Chair Hanson for meeting framing. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair Lumley. Just, as we are at this moment, finally on this last evening in May, as we narrow down to the maps that we will be sharing out with the community, Co-Chair Lumley and I also just wanted to really set the expectation, as has been shared all along, that we will not reach a perfect map. There is no, and we're not trying to be perfect this evening in particular. Not everyone necessarily will be totally happy with precisely where we land, and the goal for the maps that we're focused on tonight is to be as responsive as possible to the feedback that we have heard so far, and to get to maps that are good enough to spark meaningful public engagement this summer and start to think about what gaps we have seen or what gaps we still believe to exist, and how we channel all of those questions and those curiosities into a really robust and meaningful community engagement and public hearing series of sessions this summer. So feedback is a good thing, both what we've gotten so far and what we will continue to get, and just really, really grounding kind of in that reminder before we enter that conversation. So I'll pass it back to the staff at this point, or to Autumn, I believe. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Well, we're going to get to the commission business. So there are no excused absences this evening. For the May 17th meetings, we're going to vote at them in a future. We're going to vote to approve them in a future meeting. Just they weren't finalized in time for this meeting. But in this section, we will be focused on nominating co-chairs. So do you mind progressing the slide? So as context, in both March and April, and then the May and June co-chair terms, we put a call out to different members of the commission to connect with staff if folks were interested in becoming co-chairs. We never had more than 2 people express interest and availability to be the co-chairs for those terms. So each time the commission voted on those 2 people who expressed interest using modified consensus voting, as we typically do. This time, however, when we put the call out, we had more than 2 people express interest. So per those bylaws, we will use modified consensus and decision-making to nominate and appoint co-chairs this time around. So I am going to name the people who did reach out and express interest. You can confirm or withdraw your nomination, your self-nomination if you'd like. But I wanted to walk through the overall process for the nomination, how we'll do it to both allow for a majority voting as well as modified consensus in being consistent with the bylaws. So self-nominations will be accepted if people want to nominate during this meeting. So we'll open for nominations. We'll ask that any nominee take up to 1 minute to express like their vision for how to approach the co-chair role for the IDC. We can deliberate as a body. That will invite anyone, even those who are not nominated, to just share what they'd like to see from the commission over the next term and through the rest of the term for this body, September. We'll seek if there is any interest in withdrawing any names, we'll open the floor for that, and then we'll move in the order of the nominations we'll move in the order of the nominations to voting if needed. And we'll use, again, consensus, modified consensus. So if there's opposition to any individual, and presumably there would be because there are multiple people, we'll default to roll call voting. But we're going to try to get to consensus in this process. So the deliberation, so ideally between the deliberation and the statements, you'll need to coalesce around who you'd like to be the two co-chairs. So instead of reading out the names, I'd actually like to take nominations so that we actually have a record of the order. So again, you can nominate someone else and you can nominate yourself. So we'll open the floor now for nomination. Or actually, before we do that, are there any questions about the process? Commissioner Fleischman.
I assume that the term of office is coterminous with the existence or the planned existence of this commission. Is that correct?
That is correct. So this is the term for this set of co-chairs is July 1 to August 31st. And that does coincide with the end of when the vote for the final maps would be due. And I also realized I meant to walk through the role of the co-chairs. I'm going to do that briefly. Do you mind pulling the slide back up before we open the floor? So these are according to the bylaws. The co-chairs are there to support the facilitator's role to lead discussions and keep the IDC on time and task, collaborate with the staff and the facilitator on meeting agendas, provide guidance on content and ideas to meet the IDC's goals. You'd be responsible for establishing time limits on public testimony, provide direction to the staff and the facilitator in preparation for public meetings, provide feedback to staff on a variety of issues, participate fully and equally as a member of the IDC, encourage modified consensus decision-making, lead the meetings when all attempts at reaching consensus have been exhausted, and act as an IDC spokesperson as necessary. And then in particular, this term also coincides with a series of public hearings. So there will be 8 of those in July as well. So you need to be available and active in helping to make those a reality, shape the strategy, and also support the actual operations of those meetings too. Okay. Any questions on any of those items, process, or the role? Okay, you can ask questions later too. But seeing none, we'll open the floor for nominations. Co-Chair Lumley.
Thank you. I'd like to nominate Commissioner Lorente.
Commissioner Lorente has been nominated, noted. Commissioner Hanson.
I'd like to nominate Commissioner Judd.
Commissioner Judd's nomination is noted. Okay, any other, Commissioner Chisholm?
Hopefully you can all hear me.
We can.
Great. I had originally expressed interest in serving as one of the co-chairs, was pretty enthusiastic about doing so, had started to plan my summer schedule around the hearings, but it's become clear to me that I'm a, shall we say, passionate advocate for one of the maps. And I think we're best off having co-chairs that are not so. And so I'm going to support Commissioners Judd and Lorente, assuming that they both are interested and willing.
Thank you, Commissioner Chisholm. Are there any other nominations? Okay. Seeing that, oh, Commissioner Kimura, I saw you come off mute.
No, I'm just waiting to go, yeah, we finally got 2 more.
Perfect. Now, we did lay out the process, assuming that there might be more than 2. I would still invite Commissioner Lorente and Commissioner Judd to, one, accept the nominations if you'd like, and then to also just share a bit about how you'd approach the role.
Sure. I'll go ahead and start.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. Well, I guess I'll formally accept the nomination, and I'll just say, as folks have probably noticed, I may not be the loudest or most talkative person in the room, but one of the skills that I've always tried to lean into in my work is listening, and listening well. And I've tried to, well, not perfect, I've tried to reflect that in the maps that I've offered to this commission for consideration. And I'm thinking about how this next, term as co-chair is going to include a packed schedule of public engagement, and co-chair or not, I was planning to be at all or as many of those hearings as I can, because I think, how well we as a commission solicit, receive, and synthesize that community input is really going to determine how, the maps that we are eventually going to vote on, what voices will be heard at City Hall in the immediate future, but also how the next commission is going to approach their work when it comes time for that. So while I have every confidence that folks who might be interested in co-chairing will do a tremendous job, I just wanted to toss my hat, I guess, for consideration, and I think that's all I have to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Judd.
Good evening, everyone. I apologize, I'm having a little trouble with my camera right now. I appreciate the nomination. I will accept. One of the things that's when I first decided to be a part of this, the focus was the service, to serve others, and to make sure that the historically underrepresented communities in Portland had a voice. And so I think this, I've said this before, I think that there's 2 aspects of the work that the IDC has to do. One is the stated aspect of delivering these maps, or a map, by September 1st. But I think the other thing is the process itself that validates the map selection, meaning that the continued effort to ensure that we are holding ourselves accountable to the feedback of community members, making sure that we're reaching out to community members who have been traditionally underrepresented, and hearing their voices in terms of what these maps and how they will impact their communities, their lives, and making sure that they're comfortable with it. And so for me, it's the emphasis on ensuring in this next couple of months that we're doing the best that we can, and some new ways of sort of reaching out and engaging community members that may have been traditionally underrepresented and unaccounted for.
Thank you, Commissioner. So in line with our prior established process, we can open the floor up for modified consensus vote. Is there any opposition to having Commissioners Lorente and Commissioner Judd serve as the co-chairs for the term running July 1 to August 31st. Okay, seeing none, we've elected 2 new co-chairs. Congratulations. And of course, just to note, everyone can see the calendar. These terms, we are voting now a month in advance because there are no more work session meetings for the coming month. So starting in July. And we'll get to work and coordinate with the current co-chairs and just what that handoff looks like. Okay, so I believe I'm throwing it back to Commissioner Lumley to provide an overview of the draft criteria, or the approved criteria we'll be working with. Commissioner Lumley.
Thank you. Congratulations to the co-chairs. This slide we've seen before. Just a quick review of where we're at. When we look at our sample maps, let's keep in the context of the voter approved district criteria, which we also voted not to change. We're supposed to do is to develop maps that are as nearly as practical, contiguous and compact, utilizing existing geographic and political boundaries, not divide communities of common interest, is connected by transportation links, and is of equal population. We must also ensure that no district will be drawn for the purpose of favoring any political party, incumbent, elected official, or any other person, and diluting the voting strength of any language or ethnic group. So if there are no other questions about the criteria, I think we will turn it over to Flow Analytics for a review of the sample maps. And also, we're going to try and take a 5-minute break before 8 p.m. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry, I need to adjust my screen. So we have a couple of variations of maps that you've seen before for you tonight. And I do want to stress that any changes you want to see tonight, I think we can make those tonight so that we can hopefully get to sort of the final set of sample maps before they become draft maps. Alex, do you want to start?
Sure, I can share my screen. Let's see.
And Alex, before you, and sorry, I didn't say this before, we're going to ask that you hold any questions or discussion around the maps until after Flo has had a chance to present them. However, if there are questions around, if there are clarifying questions or you're having trouble seeing something, I think those are okay during the presentation, but any discussion we'd like to hold for after. Sorry about that.
Thanks, Autumn. Yeah, so I can walk us through a couple of these maps. Can I get a thumbs up that you guys are seeing the web application from anybody? Autumn, you see this? Okay, great. So yeah, I'm just starting with sample map 9 because I think we should maybe flip between what we were looking at the last meeting and where we are now, so we can see some differences. So we've developed a couple variations of sample maps 9, 10, and 11 to review. So sample map 9, if we recall, has a district that is mostly comprised of the west side of the Willamette, but then crosses over into Selwood and Eastmoreland. And then we have an east district that uses 205 and 82nd as a boundary. And then up in the northeast area, dividing this northeast district in a so-called southeast central district, the division being 84, but also then neighborhood organization boundaries, so Rose City Park and Rhodes Way. The variation of that is 9B. And some of the main differences here is that if I turn on the two at the same time, we can highlight them. So just a couple small changes really where you see the color differences. So let me turn off 9. So 9B, change the boundaries so that this area, kind of Jade District, is in the Green or East District. Whereas it was not in 9. It was part of this Teal District, with Montevilla and Southeast Central District. Then another change is just a little bit north of there. This is the area of Madison South that is Rocky Butte neighborhood. In sample map 9, that was part of this East Side District here. And then that changed to be part of that Southeast Central District for 9B. So now I'll move on to 10. This is a map that had, all these are in compliance with the agreed upon criteria, or rather not criteria, but direction that the IDC wanted to go at the end of the last meeting. So again, we have that West District and then crossing the river to include Sellwood, but then use more transportation corridors. This is through the Brooklyn Neighborhood Organization. This is rail right of way and then things, and then going up, having part of the Burns and Buckman neighborhoods. We have the East Side District that uses 205 and 82nd. It jogs over to include a little bit more of a larger interpretation of the Jade District. And then it uses Sandy Boulevard as a dividing line between that northeast and southeast central district. The changes that were made to that map were that instead of where it's using 82nd as a more defined boundary all the way from the south end of the city up to Burnside, where it then jogs over to Highway 205. I believe one other small change was using the Hollywood district boundary here instead of just Sandy Boulevard as a potential kind of option here to use that organizational boundary rather than the main thoroughfare. And then just an idea for 10A was aligning this a little bit better with neighborhood organization boundaries. So this is extending to the east to get all of Kearns and Buckman, rather than having it include population that goes all the way down into Sellwood. It's just a variation. So with that, I'll move on to 11. We see here that West District in map 11, it crosses the river and captures part of the east side of the Kearns and Buckman neighborhood, a little bit of Hosford Abernathy. It also extends into Sunnyside, our neighborhood organization, a little bit. It has an east side district that uses 205, as well as 82nd, that little bit extra, including a larger interpretation of the Jade District. So using a boundary like Market and Mill streets as the north end of the boundary, that would put the Jade District in that east side district. And then the boundary between northeast and the southeast central district is using Sandy as well as neighborhood boundary or organizational boundaries. So you see how Hollywood District completely within the Teal District. This is Rose City Park down to 84, completely within that orange or tan color district, but then Rose Way is being split between using Sandy Boulevard. To compare that to 11B, which is a variation of 11, you can see I turn on 11 at the same time, you see a few of the differences. Just one minor change here to have all of Sunnyside within that teal district. So that changes the population deviation just a little bit, but still within the other two, right around 4 to 5% for all three of these. And that is really the only change with 11 to 11B. However, I do know that there might be some discussion about Jade District and using 82nd rather than this kind of larger interpretation that uses a few census blocks that are on the west side of 82nd. So with that, unless I've missed anything and any of the map authors or contributors want to make any further comments, I'll turn it back to you, Autumn, and discussion.
So I wanted to just, before we hop into the session, to clarify the numbers on the maps. So the numbers that you'll see in ArcGIS do have both their base numbers, and there are variations. We're going to be focusing on maps, I believe, 9B, 10, not 10A, 10, and 11B. Alex, can you confirm that those are the ones we just saw, kind of the side by side in the changes?
That's my understanding. Yeah, 10 and 10A, and we looked at 11, 11. But yep, 11B, I think is.
Can you put that in the chat room so people can refer to it? Thanks.
Yes. Sophia, we'll jump in I think Sophia is going to put that in the chat, but we'll start with Commissioner Manjarres, followed by Commissioner Vansickle-Robbins.
I have a clarifying question to start while we're there. And I just got a little bit confused about the map numbers, so now I have to come back. So 9B is the one that adds to Jade District, basically, and so we're not going to focus on the original proposal. Is my understanding correct?
So with the edits, so 9B is the reflection of the kind of the smoothed out lines from relative to 9. Now we can make any live changes that we can, but we'll kind of assume that 9B is our base map for this discussion. And
okay,
base map 10 and base map 11B.
Okay,
However,
so
we can make like live, if there are specific, we can have discussions around moving lines and making adjustments live to get to the final versions of any maps that we may vote on. And sorry, Commissioner, you can continue.
Okay, so that's a good start, because I got a little bit confused as we were moving through the iterations of which ones we're actually going to be looking at. So 10 and 10B, in how I understood them, like 10 and then here's a revision, and so maybe I'm getting those numbers wrong. It sounded like 10B was a pretty significant change in going in. It looks very similar to map 11 to me, and so my clarifying question was going to be to get clarity about the distinction between 10B in it basically going back up into the east side and 11.
So my understanding is that there was a numbering issue, and so 10, I actually don't think there's a 10B, but the 10A that you're referencing was actually accidentally mislabeled, and so that's exactly the same as 11A. So that's pretty much off the table, and so we should have clarified that there was a numbering issue, and we haven't removed any maps or altered the names because of because we needed to maintain the public record. So it is a bit confusing, and we do apologize.
So just so I get the numbers right, can you say, you said them in the chat, sorry.
No problem. And they are, just double checking. Yes, they are in the chat, 9B, 10, and 11B.
And so I understand, just for absolute clarity, the other ones that were presented were just for reference. We're not going to discuss those today.
And the other ones that were presented were more, I think there was trying to highlight the differences of the slight changes in the lines that may have changed, or getting some of the lines to be more consistent with associations or neighborhood boundaries or transportation. But they were the working maps, and that comparison was primarily to show the difference of what's changed between what you saw at the start of the last meeting and where we kind of got via discussion. And I'm realizing I should have given that preamble beforehand. Apologies. Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins, followed by Commissioner Chisholm and then Fleischman.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify that we're going to briefly give the rationale for each of these maps before the discussion begins. Okay.
We are going to do that. But wanted to jump in case there were any questions around what we just saw first.
Thank you.
And we'll ask. So here's my list for the presenters. I think you all know, but Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins for map 9B, Commissioner Lorente to give some thoughts on map 10, and Commissioner Chisholm from map 11B. And then anyone else who contributed or wants to share in the rationale for that too, we can leave that open, but we imagine that the three of you would take the lead on those individual maps. Commissioner Chisholm.
Yeah, so we had some late breaking feedback 11B. And I'm wondering if this would be the appropriate time to have Alex do his wizardry and give us a live update and create an 11C. Is that doable? Is this the right time for that?
Commissioner Chisholm, can you hold until after the rationale and then we'll kind of start the discussion in the working on individual maps? Perfect. Commissioner Fleischman and then Commissioner Manhattan.
Yeah, I having spent some time looking at a set of maps that were provided to us ahead of time. I'm curious how the decision-making process resulted in modifications and essentially the elimination of at least one version of a map. My recollection, again, was that we had a set of maps labeled 9A, which was map number 12, 9B, which was 13, 10A, which was 14, and 11A, which was 15. And some of those are not represented here, and some of them have been modified. So I think it would be, I would be helped in understanding the process to hear how those became different than what we're looking at today.
So I'll let Alex clarify the differences in how they reconciled all of the feedback and the discussion from the last meeting. But that was the process. We agreed at the last meeting to clear up lines to focus on what were maps 9, 10, and 11. And to modify maps 9, 10, and 11 to the extent that they were inconsistent in places, perhaps they needed to be made more compact, or they needed to follow lines and more consistently. And that was what Flow Analytics did as the kind of like the technical demographers to be able to get that consistency. But there were not to my knowledge, major shifts outside of any feedback that also may have been solicited in the intervening weeks and provided to staff. So any guidance as well was incorporated.
Yeah, I want to be clear. I don't have objections. I'm not kind of lodging an objection to any of these maps. It's just unclear to me. We were provided 4 maps as saying, please take a look at these, study these as we go into these meetings, as we go into this meeting. And this is substantially different than that set.
Kimmy or Alex, do you want to speak to the differences as you understand them?
Sure, although I think I might need some clarity in terms of which sets, Commissioner Fleischman, you're referring to. So the maps that we had posted, the 9, 10, 8, 9, 10, 11, I think, at the last meeting, we were asked to take 9, 10, and 11 and create some iterations of them involving responding to the community input that we got from the AAPI community around using 82nd as a line, and effectively sort of splitting the J district per their request. And so you'll see that some of the lines, not all of them, but from Burnside to Holgate, they go up. So those were adjusted in 9-10, in the iterations from 9-10 and 11. In addition to that, we did also, as much as we could, kept Park Rose and David Douglas whole in the Far Eastern District, which was another request from the group. And then I think in terms of overall changes, we did look at keeping neighborhoods whole as much as possible. And then also making sure that specific areas such as Albina stayed whole within all of the map iterations, and that St. John's also stayed whole in all map iterations. And then there was a request to sort of clean up some of the lines so that they're not quite so jagged. Census blocks don't always cooperate, but we did the best that we could in terms of sort of cleaning up those lines. I'm not sure if that addresses all of your questions in terms of the exact differences. If we want to run through the maps, if you had specific questions.
No, that's fine. I don't want to hold up the process anymore because I don't object to looking at these maps if people have continued to work them.
Sorry, I just saw some hands go down. Commissioner Manjarres.
Yes, I have sort of a follow-up process question to that, and maybe a request for the presenters. And want to just say again and out loud before we get into the process that the process last time did not feel very good to me, and it felt a little difficult to follow and a little problematic in the sense of it felt like we got really far away from the criteria. So there were a set of decisions that were made that were not, from my perspective, grounded in the criteria, were a little bit confusing. And so my ask, I guess, to the presenters as they speak to the rationale is to reground us in the criteria. And one of the criteria, I do want to say from a personal perspective that it feels like we got into a place of talking about who doesn't want to be with you versus which communities actually want to be together. And the criteria actually talks about preserving communities. So I think that's really important. So that's the first part in the process, is if folks can reground in criteria as we're having conversation and maybe not make changes in real time until we've gone through all of them, because it just gets really confusing to track, especially on Zoom. And in the decision-making portion, and this is my question, I guess, for the facilitators. So I could also just prepare myself is understanding what our process for voting is going to be, and when we're making decisions to make changes and what that's going to look like moving forward. One thing that did not feel good about last time also, aside from the fact that it felt a little confusing and silencing, was that we were focusing on what was not going to move forward versus what we were going to move forward. And from a facilitator perspective, having a background, it's really difficult to just say, close the door on maps versus saying, these are the ones that we can rally around and we want to move forward. And so if we could structure the voting on which maps, and it sounds like we have 3 in front of us to consider, are going to move forward, that would be really helpful versus saying, now we can't talk about XYZ. Like that just doesn't feel good. It feels very silencing. So I'll make that request on that too, but would just ask that we have a clear structure for voting that is grounded in our criteria, so that when we're making comments following the presentation, we can speak to each map and not be jumping around, just because now I have a second screen. I was not prepared with the second screen last time. It's really difficult to track when we're moving through. So if we can, and Autumn, you're just brilliant and so skilled. If you could keep us sort of on a cadence of one map at a time, let's focus there, let's go to the next map, then let's go back, and then let's get into decision making so we have time to process what we're going to be deciding. That would be really helpful for me.
Thank you, Commissioner. So we were going to lay it out. We were going to try to take it in chunks so we could kind of focus on sections, but I have no problem walking through the overall approach. So we did want to be able to have the Flow Analytics team present kind of all of the maps, and knowing that it was mostly going to be a side-by-side, but we will take each map individually. And for the voting, both for transparency and clarity, we'll have votes on individual maps that would move forward, right? And in the affirmative, knowing that they will be carried by a simple, they would need to be carried either by modified consensus. So if there's any opposition, we move to a roll call vote, which would then require a simple majority to move a map forward for consideration as a draft map. But that will be done map by map by map. Now, what we can do, so just in terms of organizing, if this process works, we can take those maps, we can consider each map kind of individually, and then ultimately vote on each map individually and do the votes separately and have focused discussions. That was the plan, but if there's any opposition to that approach, I don't see any. So that'll be the plan. We'll continue, we'll stick with that. We'll focus, we'll have a rationale presented on each one, but then when it comes to actually digging into the maps, we'll continue to use modified consensus to do that. Like we'll talk about, I know that there was some discussion around some potential changes that have just emerged, even in the thinking around map 11 specifically. And there's just been additional feedback. And so we can contend with that. We can also discuss, right? Do these lines make sense? Does this map feel right? Are there adjustments to make? And does it still feel relevant? Are there combinations of maps? Would you like to go with 2 instead? And we can talk through those discussions and talk through those decisions at this point. And we'll say, I think in the last session, probably because the motions were so focused on kind of narrowing, I would say that I think the attempt and the strategy was to be able to articulate more. Every affirmative has a negative, right? And so instead of not lumping in this section or including this section in one district, was really about an attempt to keep them whole, right? And to clarify, right? We won't separate, and in that way, but it clearly has an opposite counteraction, right? In the sense that you're not doing something, but we'll work on trying to frame that more positively as we go forward and just be very clear about what is affirmative, what is happening affirmatively. So I appreciate the feedback. I won't speak for everyone else, but I saw some heads nodding too. Thank you. So I think that process, and we can check in around the process. If it doesn't feel right, if it feels too rushed, if it is confusing, we'll pause, we'll slow down, we'll revisit. And the idea is to we want this process is very important. How we go about doing this, how we go about making decisions, how we go about discussing will, 1, hopefully yield a better product, but also 2, will help us stay in alignment with those values. So are there any so we'll move into just, again, it's kind of synthesizing the thinking and the rationale behind the base maps. I'll reiterate, they're base maps. So this will be the opportunity to discuss them, to weigh in, and we'll try to spend time with each map at about the same amount of time. We don't want too much of the focus to go into any one map, but I'll go where you lead. So let's start with Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins. Can you just do a brief summary of kind of the thinking that went into map 9A or 9A?
9B.
Oh, I'm sorry. See, there I misspoke. Thank you. 9B.
So I just wanted to thank everybody who's made comments so far, because they're all helpful for all of us to remember kind of where we're going with this. Just to clarify for Commissioner Fleischman, 9A, the differences between 9B and 9A were really about trying to bring the population deviation back down to a lower point. And 9A also split the Montavilla and the Montavilla East Tabor business districts right down the middle at 82nd, which was something that this map was trying to avoid. The map conforms to the two approaches that we approved at our last meeting, which was creating an outer east district that stretched from the Columbia River down to the southern border of the city in order to include all 4 of the eastern school districts, and to create a district that include all of the city west of the Willamette in a single district. This map also prioritizes preserving established neighborhood boundaries to the greatest degree possible when drawing the district boundaries. And we've heard that a lot from all kinds of different neighborhoods in the public comment that we've received to date. In this map, the East District has a west border that follows I-205 and 82nd in order to include as much of the Jade Business District and the Lentz Business District as we could in that East District. And the district west of the Willamette River crosses the river at the southern end of the city to include the Selwood, Westmoreland, Eastmoreland, and Reed neighborhoods to achieve the equal population criteria. These neighborhoods connect to the west side via the Selwood and Ross Island bridges to be connected by transportation links, which are in our criteria. And they're also demographically and socioeconomically similar to those on the west side quite a few of those on the west side of the river. It does divide the city's 2035 Central City Plan District, which is all of that downtown Goose Hollow, South Waterfront, Lloyd, Central East Side. It divides that area up into among 3 districts intentionally, the North Northeast, the Central East, and the West districts, to promote broad engagement with central city issues and economic opportunities, and to avoid packing significant community assets and institutions within a single district. It cites the northern boundary of the Central East District from the Willamette along I-84 until crossing to the north in order to capture 3 of the 4 northern neighborhoods, Rose City, Roseway, and Madison South, that are part of the McDaniels High School enrollment area that stretches south across I-84. The Cully neighborhood, which is also in that enrollment area, is kept in the North-Northeast District due to equal population criteria and feedback that we've received to date from that neighborhood. And also, in order to achieve equal population criteria, the Montevilla neighborhood is in the Central East District and the Lentz neighborhood is in the East District, because when you start to try and draw this line, you cannot include both of those neighborhoods in one or the other and not blow through the population, equal population that you're trying to achieve. So that, in a nutshell, is what kind of drove this map design.
Thank you, Commissioner. Does anyone else want to add thoughts about this map, weigh in on some of the rationale? Commissioner Baldini, I know that you were not at the last meeting. Is there anything to add?
I don't have anything to add. I think Commissioner Van Sickle-Robbins did a fantastic job. I did want to note, I've been thinking a lot about asset packing, and so if anyone wanted to talk more about that, I'm happy to share some thoughts, but it doesn't have to be right now.
Thank you, Commissioner. Hey. Commissioner Manares.
I was not involved in the creation of this map, but really this is probably one of my favorites, I'll say. But I appreciate what you did with the Jade District, because I'm not sure if folks are aware, but the American Pacific Network of Oregon is actually in the neighborhood that you pulled back into the Jade District. That's where their home base is located, and they are an organization that really is central to organizing a lot of those diverse communities. So I'm not sure if that was intentional, but just wanted to name that appreciation for the revision on this map, because I think that was really important. And on the top as well, looking at where the Pacific Islander and Asian Family Center, parts of ERCO I think are now pulled back into the east side as well. So again, I just noticed that as they were talking about some of the small changes that happened. So again, not sure if that was intentional, but really appreciate those minor changes. But I think they'll have a big impact.
Thank you, Commissioner. And before we go to the next map, are there any questions for Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins, Commissioner Vandini, or Flo and Alex? Co-Chair Lumley.
A question for Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins. Did in response to previous commissioners' request about whether or not the criteria were followed, do you believe that any of the criteria that we're working with were violated in the creation of your map?
I hope not. We tried very hard not to violate any of those criteria. I do believe that all of us have had to wrestle with what are communities of common interest. There's a lot of ways to define it. And so that's why I said that, we started at the front end by saying, let's see how much we can honor neighborhood boundaries, because we had heard that from so many people about so many neighborhoods. So that was kind of one of the places that we looked at communities of common interest.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Fleischman.
Yeah, just a really small question. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness that this map represents. There is this one tiny, I think it's a census tract that cannot be divided. That's the Alameda Ridge. That tiny little section
Was it in
there.
Rose? Yeah.
Yes, and I'm wondering whether you could say something about why you decided that it became green, like how it got allocated there as opposed to having kind of the little bit jut out in the opposite direction.
Actually, it was just about the way that the map allowed us to draw. I mean, you could, it runs back all the way. Alex can cry. It either runs back, it runs that way or the other way. And,
Right.
and there was nothing intentional about choosing that versus the other. And, I think I'm certainly open to if there are good rationale for moving it the other way. I don't think it makes a big difference in terms of the population change or anything like that.
Thanks. Somebody's gonna, whichever way, if we drew this, somebody might object. So, but I was just curious whether there was a rationale. It is a kind of a geographic boundary. You're coming off of the ridge. So in some ways, people may feel like they are, they're part of that neighborhood that's defined by the ridge or not at that point. I don't know. Thank you.
Commissioner Lemon.
Good question. Thank you for bringing that up. So in this case, does the neighborhood boundary dissect census tract?
A census
So it's-
block, yep. So
census
this is a one census block right here that I'm kind of
Thank you.
outlining right here. So yeah, this census block has a dividing line here with the neighborhood association boundary. So it will have to be in one district or the other.
Thank you.
There's one other example of that up here too. If you notice, there's some interesting census blocks here that are quite large. So there's a boundary right here
Roseway.
between Cully and Roseway that these census blocks have to all be in either the tan orange district or the teal.
Yeah, I live in kind of near there and there's overlapping neighborhood boundaries. And in fact, I think there's this chunk of that area that's not part of a neighborhood. It's sort of like almost like unincorporated neighborhoodness in there.
Thank you. Commissioner Rente, would you be able to share the rationale and the thinking behind map 10, please?
Absolutely. And just first, thank you to Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins for that explanation. I think we'll get some good discussion and contrasting your sort of approach with 9B to sample map 10. So as a transit reliant Portlander, one of my prioritizations in drawing map 10 was prioritizing our major transit corridors over other boundary considerations, like such as our neighborhood association boundaries. And in my approach, I was thinking about this notion of fluidity. One of the things we've talked about with the Jade District, for example, is that the universe of people who might identify with belonging to the Jade District might extend beyond the boundaries of Jade District proper. And I hypothesize that the same could be said for your average Portlander in the neighborhood associations, where you might have folks on the edge of Sunnyside who identify with belonging in the Mount Tabor neighborhood, or vice versa, and throughout the city. And on the other hand, some of the boundaries that I chose to use here, thinking about Sandy Boulevard, 82nd, our Max lines, the interstate, these are boundaries that I believe are intuitive to every Portlander. And yes, like absolutely, we should respect and consider the public comments we've received to date with regard to neighborhood associations. And there are areas on map 10, thinking about the Sumner neighborhood, where I do follow neighborhood association boundaries. But I would also add that I think we should be cautious in assuming that these comments about neighborhood associations are reflective of Portlanders writ large. And moreover, looking at just at a glance, many of these neighborhood associations are very curiously drawn. And I think part of this is ignorance on my part, and I would like to learn more about who drew these neighborhood association boundaries, what rationale did they use, how robust was their public engagement, how often are they drawn or redrawn, and those questions are kind of open in my mind. So I do elevate our transit corridors in thinking about some of these boundaries here. And one of my priorities as well was trying to make sure that our boundaries made as much intuitive sense to Portlanders as possible. And I think these corridors do accomplish a bit of that. And thinking about the North Portland district, a couple considerations that I was thinking about was making sure that the St. John's neighborhood, as a former resident of that neighborhood myself, was included and intact with a North Portland district. And dividing historic Albina was also an unshakable that I was holding as I was drawing this map. Another thing that I would add, based on feedback we've received in previous meetings, was making sure that the border south of the airport stayed off of Columbia Boulevard, so that the businesses and communities north of that roadway there stayed intact with North Portland. So this map tries to honor that as well. And just thinking about the West Side district, I tried to think about this not so much as a West Side district, but sort of as a river district as well. So if one of my sort of approaches was keeping North Portland intact, then following the Central East Side Industrial Council, Brooklyn and Selwood neighborhood lines, I think my rationale there was thinking that these are the entities east of the river that have the Willamette on the west and public transit lines on the east. I believe line 72, I forget which line, but there's a major transit line that runs there on 12th. And then east of Brooklyn and Selwood is the Max Orange line running down that way as well. And I think part of that consideration was, one, for population balance, but also a bit of fairness as well. These are the entities that have many bridge connections to the west side. And like I said, there's also public transit on the eastern boundary of those maps as well. And just comparing the map I drafted here with sample map 10A, it looks like a trade-off was made in including Kearns and Buckman in the West Side District versus Brooklyn and Selwood. I'm not quite sure where I land on that update, and would be really curious to hear how other folks are thinking about juxtaposing those changes as well. But that was kind of the rationale and approach to drawing these lines. And yeah.
Point of clarification, map 10A was mislabeled and it wasn't changed so as to not alter the public record. So map 10, the one you're presenting, is the updated version.
Got it. Thank you.
Or sorry, is the base version. Thank you, Commissioner Lorente. Is there anyone else that either worked on this group and helped to develop the rationale, or anyone else who'd like to share just some of the thinking behind this map? Okay. And then Commissioner Manjarres.
Thank you. Sorry, just, chatty mood today. Thank you, Commissioner Lorente, for presenting this. I'm curious with this map on the transportation criteria. So even again, coming back to the criteria and how we're thinking about that. I guess I'm curious to hear how you envision the criteria we've been providing, particularly around transportation links being included here. So when I read and I'll just I guess be transparent how I'm thinking about this. When I read connected by transportation links, I read folks can move easily through their district. That's sort of how I interpret it. But it feels to me like you use the transportation lines as sort of like natural geographic boundaries. So when you were doing that, were you thinking about that as sort of like that boundaries piece of it, or were you thinking about it in the context of transportation links? And what other aspects of the criteria do you feel like, I'm hearing some of the preserved communities, and I really appreciate that. Which ones do you think were really elevated through this?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I did go back and forth in my head in thinking about these transit corridors and asking myself, are these sort of assets that should be included within a district, or sort of like boundaries, but also bonds that connect districts together? I think where I ultimately landed was on the latter piece of that. But I don't know with regard to the criteria that is, I think this still respects the connected by transportation link criteria. Thinking about some of the other major roadways that run through a lot of these districts, I think that is still respected. So I think it's a little of both ultimately, but part of my approach here was also, I think I shared this in our last meeting as well, is, I felt it was important to make sure that we're not so much dividing Portland up into 4 districts, but sort of uniting 4 districts into one sort of, one Portland. And I thought using some of our transit corridors to bond these districts together and sort of maybe encourage a little bit of collaboration between these communities, I felt like was a value, I think, that also guided some of my thinking with this as well. But I do think that ultimately this still respects the connection, the transit connection criteria. So yeah.
Thank you, commissioners. Commissioner Saxena.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And I just really wanted to express some sincere appreciation for this map and the thinking behind it, and just sort of the way that you're kind of like rethinking. Because I think we have been looking very carefully at neighborhood boundaries, and I just like that you've rethought that, because it gets me thinking about how the connections can be looked at differently. So I just really wanted to express some appreciation for this map and how thoughtful it is, and all the thought that you put into it. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Lumley.
Thank you. I also appreciate the map quite a bit. Earlier tonight, we heard from Commissioner Chisholm about the J District folks wanting to use the 82nd Avenue boundary, and I was curious how open you are to that kind of a modification.
I am 100% open to shifting those boundaries. I think I might have been using an outdated link, but I thought I saw an updated version of this map that went down 12th Street like straight, instead of carving out for the Central East Side Industrial Council. And I thought I saw an updated version for 82nd as well, but I'm absolutely open to those changes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. There's also the area around the Hollywood neighborhood, and I'm not seeing on my map, but is Sandy Boulevard cutting through Hollywood District on your map? Is that a boundary?
I can jump in, or yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Alex.
I was just gonna say in the original map 10, Sandy Boulevard is used as the boundary throughout. So I'll turn on the Hollywood district boundary right now. And yes, it does bisect Hollywood. So that's kind of a question, is if that boundary should be used or if Sandy should continue all the way to 84.
The reason why I bring that up is I used to live near that area, and Hollywood district feels like they're contiguous across the Sandy Boulevard, at least in that neighborhood. And I don't know how open you are to that, and using perhaps I-84 is the lower boundary. Or maybe this is something we released for public comment too. Either way, thank you.
No, absolutely. And I think whether it's Sandy Boulevard through the middle of it or 84 Max Line on the south, I think either of those directions would sort of be in line with my general approach to drawing this. And I think that was probably a population balance and sort of clean line consideration that I made there. But I open to that change and could go either way, I think.
Thank you.
And we will spend some time with each map just to look at lines and to assess whether the group would like to move any before considering the map for a vote. Commissioner Baldini.
Thank you. Just to echo what everyone's saying, I think this is a great map. I really like the emphasis on transportation as someone who uses public transportation a lot as well. That makes a lot of sense to me. And it's my understanding that the neighborhood boundaries were drawn in response to the previous electoral system, our at-large electoral system. So you're right in thinking they might be more fluid than what we're anticipating. So I'm glad we're thinking and talking about this. I think that the issue that I wanted to raise, just to put out there, I'm not sure if this is the right moment for it, but I am concerned about the number of community assets in the blue district at this point, particularly having so much waterfront. And then what I'm worried about is the downtown west side plus the OMSI area that's going to be redeveloped on the east side being in the same district. It just seems like that's a lot. And I would want to hear, if we were to move forward with this, I would want to hear from the potential green district. Are they okay letting the OMSI area go? And yeah, so that's really my hesitation about this map, but I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
And just noting just in terms of the colors, the blue, it was referencing the more west, the district more to the west, and the green was referencing the district more to the south. And the concern was around concentration in the western district.
Follow up with Commissioner Baldini. Could you expand a little bit on the asset packing? I know there was a sort of a seminar a few weeks ago that I missed. And you mentioned earlier you might want to talk about it.
Absolutely. Just briefly, and many thanks to the organization that put on the asset packing seminar, whose name just escaped me, but I really appreciate
California Common Cause.
Thank you. Yes. So what they talked a lot about and what we thought about was the relationship between assets in a district and the power of the representatives who represent that district. We thought a lot about both the economic benefits that civic assets bring a district, as well as the attention benefits. That is, if you are a representative of a district that has major civic assets, you're going to get more attention from the governor, you're going to get more attention from the media. So just thinking about the value of putting assets as equally as we can across districts to both offer economic drivers in multiple districts, as well as offer opportunities for attention and conversations across multiple districts. Also, we learned that we see more, or they taught us that there's more collaboration when assets are split. That is, if we put all the assets in one district, there's going to be less discussion about it. That was pretty much an overview, but if you have any specific questions, I'm happy to tell you more.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Chisholm, Did you want to weigh in on this map or did you want to?
Yeah,
talk about another one?
I just wanted to ask a question of Commissioner Baldini on the asset backing question. I also missed the seminar and have not had a chance since I've been traveling to go back and watch the video, but I will do that. My understanding though, from Googling before the seminar, was that the folks at California Common Cause were particularly concerned in Los Angeles with asset packing as it related to campaign finance. That in other words, if all the goodies are in one district, those commissioners get all the fundraising. But of course, in Portland, we don't. We have a public financing system now that dramatically restricts high dollar fundraising. Was that the primary? It is true that the public financing program in Portland is optional, but it's, I suspect, going to be heavily used by everyone who runs. Could you speak to that, Commissioner Baldini, and talk a little bit about how the concern extends beyond campaign financing, or if that's really what we're talking about is the power dynamics related to fundraising?
Absolutely, yeah, and good question. So campaign finance and fundraising did come up. It was not, and there were other commissioners there, so please feel free and weigh in if I misrepresent. It was not the only concern. They did grant that there is a particularly high, disproportionately high campaign money coming in from areas that have assets packed in them. And I would also argue a bit about the restrictions you mentioned on public financing in Portland. I think there are loopholes there, and so I don't necessarily want us to lean on that without really getting clarification. But the other elements of asset packing that they brought up that spoke to me was really two elements. Number one, the commissioner visibility and power that are granted to those representatives that have major assets in their district. So, for example, if you have the airport in your district, you're going to have a direct line to the governor, right? If you have downtown in your district, you're going to have a direct line. So we want to be mindful of not over empowering one district, making sure that we spread that out, or at least that was what we were discussing. The other element, again, that they discussed was this collaboration. So when we imagine our future city council and thinking about promoting as much collaboration and cooperation as possible, when one spreads assets out across districts, apparently this increases the amount of collaboration amongst the counselors. So those were the other benefits of avoiding asset packing beyond just the campaign finance.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Baldini. Be careful, you might get recruited. Commissioner Fleischman and then Commissioner Van Sickle-Robbins.
Yes, I was one of the other folks who attended the webinar. It was Commissioners Hanson, Baldini, Van Sickle-Robbins, and myself, I believe, were all there live. And I think Commissioner Baldini was accurate in her portrayal of some of the concerns. I would add two notes. One of them is there was a question about, does this change if you have a multi-member district and essentially a larger districts, and whether that is a dimension that is significant, which is what we're facing. And I don't think that there was necessarily a good solid answer on that. So there was that limitation of the guidance, which the webinar was excellent. So this is I'm not detracting from that. The second is, I think, a theme that I will come back to, and we may come back to as a commission, is we have to hear from the public around whether this matters to them more than something else. So for example, it may be just the opposite of what Commissioner Baldini says, and that the neighborhoods that are adjacent say, no, that's fine. We don't have an issue with the line being drawn here. It makes sense to us. We don't know until we go out and we ask these questions. There was an example given of a small district, I think in Chula Vista, California, which essentially decided that they preferred to give up some assets in order to preserve essentially their voting power as a kind of an intact cultural group, that mattered more to them than some other considerations that somebody kind of in the abstract might have said mattered more. So that's just to reemphasize the importance of us going out and getting the feedback that we will be getting over the next 2 months.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Van Sickle-Robbins, I'll ask you to close us out on this discussion, so we have time to consider map 11 as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on what Commissioner Fleischman just said and say that there was also some conversation about the perception that exists in the other zones when a whole host of assets are put into kind of scooped into a single zone. And as someone who is a Portland native, I just worry, and grew up in North Portland, I worry about all of those assets being scooped into the West Side zone, because I think that a lot of the other zones already feel like that is a part of town that has a lot of assets and affluence.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, and we will revisit the maps, but I did want to make sure we had time to hear the rationale and thinking behind map 11. And then I believe Commissioner Chisholm, you also wanted to just, as you were presenting the map, elaborate more on the thinking around the Jade District specifically too.
Correct. Let's talk about map 11B. You can all hear me okay? I trust. So big picture, again, as with the other two maps, first of all, let me say that I am struck by actually how much consensus there is between these three basic maps. We've come to a place where we agree on almost everything, and now we're down to the things where we're trying to find consensus, points of disagreement. So big picture, one West Side district, one East Side district that includes everything east of 205, includes all four of the non-PPS school districts on that East Side district. That's where I started as a premise in beginning to develop this map. And then as we proceeded, let me just talk a little bit about sort of one of the central things that I focus in on, which is in the downtown area. The city of Portland has been for many, many years, since 1988, developed a central city plan designed to recognize that the central city is the economic engine of the city and requires different zoning rules and different kinds of management, has different kinds of management challenges. The central city zone includes what we think of as downtown, Old Town, the Pearl. It also, in the revision, they started to produce in 2015 and finished in 2020, called the Central City 2035 Plan. Now includes South Waterfront. It includes the Central East Side Business District, which goes up to 12th, and it includes Lower Albina and the Lloyd District. So my initial premise for this map was to put that entire zone, including the pieces that are east of the river, in with the pieces that are west of the river. The adjustment we've made along the way is to move Lower Albina and Lloyd District back up. We want to keep the community of interest of the historically African-American part of Portland, north of the river in the North and Northeast District. That has become even more apparent as a wise choice, and I will note that all the maps now do this, with the announcement of a $400 million and perhaps more investment by Phil and Penny Knight into the Lower Albina zone. That's going to be a big part of Portland's future. And so that I'm happy to have that part be part of the Northeast Portland zone. I do think it's important to include that central east side zone in with the up to 12th in with downtown. It is dense. It is urban. It is a critical part of the sort of structure of the city. You'll see that there are, I believe, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 bridges that cross there. It is part of the same community, in my view. In addition, for population reasons, we had to grow somewhere. And what we've done is we've decided in this map is keep Buckman and Kearns neighborhoods intact, which basically means adding in the very dense renter-centric census blocks that are along Sandy Boulevard. This makes sense as a single community of interest by pairing them with those renter-centric areas with the renter-centric areas in Old Town, Downtown, Goose Hollow, the University District, and South Waterfront. I think it's important to note that this actually brings down the average income socioeconomic criteria for the entire West Side. It's basically uniting the low income communities of Goose Hollow, Old Town, University District with the low to middle income renter communities of Buckman and Kearns. We tend to think of, in our popular mindset, of thinking of the West Side as a place of lots of wealth. Everclear even had a song about it. I'll buy you a house in the West Hills. But I think it's important to recognize that the West Side includes a lot of low-income communities, a lot of low-income families, particularly renters in downtown. And I think we want to pair them with the community of low-income renters in Buckman and Kearns. That's the thinking with this part of it. If we can move over to the east side, actually, let's go to northeast, the Sandy Boulevard zone here. Map 9 was all about the neighborhood association boundaries. Map 10 was about Sandy Boulevard. And here we sort of split the difference. It is the Rose City Park neighborhood that is kept intact, whereas Roseway is, and Hollywood is kept intact. But Roseway is split along Sandy Boulevard. I would say that I'm open to, I want to hear from the public on this. We've had a lot of feedback on both sides of the question. I've heard folks say Sandy Boulevard is the ball game, folks. Others say it must be the neighborhoods. I think I'm looking forward to hearing in July from folks in these communities to tell us what the best approach is. It's not really about the numbers. It's really about what makes sense from a community standpoint. So that's a wide open question for me. And then if we can slide down to the Jade District. The other piece that I want to recognize is that while many ethnic and cultural groups in Portland are sort of evenly spread across the city landscape, the AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander community, does have some geographic concentration to the east and to the south of the formal Jade District boundary. And just having a district that is east of 205 accomplishes most of the goal of maintaining that community of interest. To the extent that we're coming west of 205, again, for population reasons, the question becomes, where do you do that? And I think we're all in agreement that Lentz is a big part of that. But beyond that, for me, it was important to include originally the entire Jade Business District, which is what you're looking at in this map here. This map has this sort of little bit jagged line that basically goes around the entire Jade Business District. However, I've been communicating a lot with Duncan Huang, elected Metro Councilor, as well as a person who works for Apano. And he's been working directly with the Jade Business District Steering Committee. And they've decided that their guidance to us is that they would prefer that these handful of blocks that are west of 82nd be moved into the east, be moved into the Teal District, as it were, the Southeast District, splitting the Jade Business District down the middle. That would give them the ability as a community to advocate with multiple city commissioners, with 6 city commissioners essentially, while keeping the bulk of their community in the Eastern District. So if we could at some point make a live change here, make an 11th seat, it would just be to move just this handful of blocks that are west of 82nd into the teal district, or what is on this map, District 3. I will stop there and take your questions.
Point of clarification, though the maps are, the districts are
know,
numbered in the
yes, I know.
software. Yes, those are not formal. Just so everyone is aware. Those are not formally numbered districts. That is a process that will be separate and determined in August. But this is just for reference on the sample map.
Yes.
Okay. Did any of the other contributors who worked on this map want to weigh in? Commissioner Saxena, I know that you presented in the last meeting. Is there anything to add? Would anyone else like to weigh in?
Yeah, no, thank you. That was super thorough, Commissioner Chisholm. I really appreciated that. The only thing I might add, which is actually something that's common in all of the maps, is I wanted to kind of uplift a little bit, kind of outer southwest Portland, which is the part of town that I think when folks are thinking about the west side, they might not think about, that has a couple of Title I schools. It's got some public housing. It lacks sidewalks. It lacks park access. And it's, it's a part of the west side that I think folks aren't often thinking about. It's adjacent to Beaverton, which I think we all know is extremely diverse. And so there's communities of color, Somali community in particular, that lives in kind of in outer southwest Portland. And I just wanted to uplift that as well. And it's not, we're not obviously going to draw a boundary that takes them out or puts them in someplace, but I just wanted to make sure that folks are aware that that's a community and on the west side that folks often don't think about unless you're familiar with it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Manjarres.
So quick point of clarification before I ask my question. Are we going to comment as folks who did not work on some of these maps? Are we going to come back to the maps to comment and have conversation about maybe some concerns with some of the maps at a later point? Or is this just a moment of clarification?
No, anyone can weigh in at this point on just any thoughts, questions, or concerns that you have with the specific maps. Or
okay,
this map in particular, ideally.
Okay, great. I guess I have a question for folks. As I was thinking about these maps and reflecting on them as we were moving in, and again, coming back to this criteria premise around communities of interest and how we draw communities of interest and think about the humans involved. I feel like what I realized last time or after our last conversation is that along the way, we sort of landed on the west side as sort of a community of interest, like preserving the whole west side as a community of interest. So it felt like a lot of the maps were really tailored towards pulling population from the east side to address that. And I guess I'll ask Commissioner Chisholm on that, just because I recognize it was reflected in all the options that were coming up. And I don't know if that was just an assumption we made, but I didn't hear that reflected in public comment. And to put a finer point on it, it seems interesting to me that the preserving the communities on the east side wouldn't pull naturally from the west side for population. So I'm curious to get just some clarification on sort of the data around not dividing or keeping a whole west side interest whole as the community of interest, and where that premise came from, to Commissioner Chisholm, since we're on this map.
Yeah, I just put in the chat that Commissioner Hansen drew a map that pulled from the west side to the east side that I found really interesting and intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is sort of one of those going back to the beginning kinds of questions, but since we seem to have landed there with all three of these base maps. But I think it's, when I first started doing this work, trying to fiddle with the maps, I found it very hard to make a rationale for doing anything other than having a single West Side district, particularly if you start with the assumption you're going to have a single East Side district. And for me, that was where I started, was East Portland has been historically underrepresented and ignored by City Hall. And so let's make sure there's a district that we know will elect 3 people from east of 205. And once you do that, it becomes very hard to divide the west side. I mean, just from a population standpoint, the north part of West Side, north of Highway 26, other than downtown area, there's almost no population up there. It's a whole lot of territory. That's Forest Park, and so what you're really talking about is outer Southwest, and talking about splitting outer Southwest into two pieces. It was very hard. I know we had at least one public commenter who said, use I-5 as the boundary. And like, it's just not a way to rationally do that. I'm not sure I have a better answer. I'm not sure that's a very satisfactory answer, but that's at least the answer I have is it's just, doesn't ever seem to make sense.
Yeah, and I'll just go into some of my comments and then hand it off to other folks. I just want to challenge the premise a little bit. I did finally sit down and start to draft some maps. And I think that if you start with a premise of preserving some of the population centers on the east side, you end up sort of splitting around the downtown area into what could be a north, south, sort of central, east side, preserving a whole east side district. And again, that's not the conversation we're having today, but I just wanted to elevate that assumption because I realized we landed there without really having a conversation there. And so again, this is why I wanted to bring us back to ground in the criteria a little bit in terms of if we're identifying that a West Side district needs to be preserved, I would like and hope that it would be grounded in some of the criteria as we go into public conversation about these, because I feel like that's something that we need to be able to respond to as we go into the conversations. And another thing that I guess I'm reflecting on with this particular map and with Commissioner Lorente's map is, so in my background, I did participate and co-chair the group that worked on the original proposal around looking at multi-member districts, the City Club Research Committee that was looking at how we would draw a Portland that would increase representation, really activate and engage voter participation, create more equitable access to services, et cetera, particularly, for those who have been historically marginalized by our systems. And my big concern with this map is it feels like what we're trying to do with Portland as a whole in terms of getting away from what, again, to me, it's a clear Voting Rights Act violation, an at-large district that sort of marginalizes an east side. I feel like that's sort of, I can see that as I look at this map, and it gives me a little bit of anxiety. So just to give that background on that piece, I feel like if we start with the premise of where the humans are at and who we're trying to preserve, I feel like this map and a map that pulls from some of those central east side areas does break some of the culture and community that I feel like are really central to Portland. So I did spend the weekend actually riding my bike down to the inner east side to talk to folks in the community who I'm very close with and business owners in the community to just elevate this situation and to talk to them to say, get those reflections and perspectives in some of these maps. And I could not find a single person in many conversations over the weekend, luckily I stayed in town, who agreed with splitting the inner east side. I feel like the inner east side of Portland has been identified as a community of interest. Even when I moved to the city, that was identified to me as a community of interest leading up to Burnside, going down to Powell. It's just part of what we understand. So I feel like this particular map was that, and Commissioner Lorente's map also in splitting some of the neighborhood districts or the humans who have identified themselves as communities of interest or folks who want to be together in a district, I think is really important to listen to. Also to want to elevate that in the public comment, the Community Alliance of Tenants, the renter-centric advocacy group, very familiar with renter populations across Portland, is opposed to this map that would split the inner east side and the tenants in those districts. So I just wanted to name some of my concerns around that and come back to the asset packing conversation that I feel like is really important. I feel like it was the conversation I was trying to have at the very beginning with the criteria around assets, community goods and services and those kinds of things. And I feel like folks landed on better language and analysis around it. But for this particular map, as we talk about this plan for the central city and calling it the economic engine of Portland feels like it should not live in a single district. So I do feel like that sort of solidified for me some of the big concerns I have around concentrating some of those assets in these districts. So I had one question in there, but just wanted to name some of those concerns that as we move into a conversation around criteria and thinking about which maps we move forward, I do think focusing on the humans involved and remembering that the purpose of these districts is to increase representation and engagement. And there is no perfect map. We're going to hear a lot of feedback. And my hope is that we can rally around a map that really gives Portlanders an opportunity to respond and to show themselves in each district. And as I'm thinking more and more of it, I, personally feel like if we can narrow this even further so that folks can have a map or maybe two maps to provide feedback on, I think it would make it easier for public engagement. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Commissioner. I do want to make sure that the three commissioners in the queue do have a chance to respond or to share comments for, but I did have one clarifying question. You, Commissioner Manjarres, you noted that you had a concern around the Voting Rights Act and in relation to an outer East Portland district. Did I mishear that?
Yeah, I was just giving an analogy to say that, when I'm an election attorney also, and so I spend a lot of time on these issues. And when I arrived in Portland, just looked at it and was like, at large, this is a clear Voting Rights Act violation. And I think that the whole purpose of getting into districts and representations was that I was just saying that when I look at a West Side district that pulls in, I just see some of the East Side, I can just see sort of a mini-me version, I guess, of what I saw in Portland when I arrived. And so I just wanted to elevate that as an issue. And I also did work on drafting and passing the public financing that Portland now works under, and it is optional and it does have an impact when we talk about some of the asset issues. So we can go into that in a whole other conversation, but do have a lot of background on that as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. So we have 4 commissioners want to speak. So we'll start with Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins, followed by Commissioner Judd, then Lumley, and Commissioner Siegel. Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins.
Thank you. I just wanted to quickly say two things. We've had a lot of public comment about the natural dividing line of the Willamette River. It's historical, good or bad, it's historical. And we've had those comments from people west of the river and east of the river that is a dividing line. So I think that's one of the reasons why we've had this conversation about all of the west side of the river being in a single district. The other thing I thought was very interesting, we've had comments from people about why don't you look at the Multnomah County, the 4 zones in Multnomah County. And so this weekend when I was putzing around with looking at all the maps, I thought it was very interesting that the Multnomah County West District, I'm not sure which number it is. It includes Selwood, Westmoreland, Brooklyn, Hosford, Abernathy, Buckman, and Kearns, and part of Richmond, Sunnyside, and Creston, Kenilworth. Those are all in the west side. And interestingly, all 4 of the eastern school districts are chopped up into 3 different districts. So I think that just saying that there are boundaries out there that have been created or are historical doesn't mean that they're not as that they don't violate some of the same things that we're discussing right now in terms of how people feel about what's in a certain community, what needs to be preserved as whole.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Judd.
Just kind of a question or that would help me at least understand the differences between the maps. So a lot of considerations begin to each one of the maps, a lot of intentional thought. And so I guess, Carrie, if I were to ask you just for the elevator speech, in terms of what are the 2 or 3 things that are significantly different in your map versus the other 2, and then just so that, let me stop there.
sorry, you were asking me?
Yeah, and so I guess what I'm trying to get an understanding from is from those who have submitted these maps now, and with all the intentional thought that they placed into them, if, for example, Carrie, if you can look at the other two maps and say, this is how mine is significantly different, and it'd be helpful if the other two maps, so Commissioner Lorente, if you were to be able to do the same, that'd be really helpful for me at least, just to pinpoint in on where you're seeing from you guys' perspective, what the significant differences are.
From my perspective, there are some differences in the Northeast area, the Sandy Boulevard versus neighborhoods question. I suspect that probably that is a smaller difference, or one that is less, perhaps a less important fight. It certainly is for me. I'm sort of open to the public there. To me, the big difference here is the question of, does the West Side District include the Central City 2035 planning zone, which is to say Central East Side Industrial, plus Buckman and Kearns? Or does the West Side, as in map 9, cross over and include Sellwood and Eastmoreland? And then of course you got map 10, which does a little bit of both. We had a lot of public comment in this last round of public comments from folks in Sellwood saying they wanted to be part of the East Side. They think of themselves as inner Southeast Portland residents and not West Side folks. So I think that's the big question before us. And the good news, I think, is that we're going to be advancing at least 2 maps to the public for July hearings. It seems apparent to me that we've got folks on this commission who feel strongly about the Sellwood approach, and folks who feel strongly about the inner Southeast approach, or the Central East Side approach. I mean, we should take it to the public and let them give us some feedback. And with you and Commissioner Lorente as co-chairs, I think we're in a pretty good place.
So, Alden, if I could have Commissioner Lorente answer the same question.
And if I may, Commissioner Lorente and Commissioner Van Sickle-Robbins, if you want to weigh in, probably can you make it additive? So if Commissioner Chisholm already covered it as a distinction.
Yep.
Yeah. Right.
Sure, I'll make this quick. So part of my thinking is that our public transit system is a defining feature and quality of our city. One of my priorities is making sure that our district boundaries make intuitive sense to the average Portlander. And I think leaning into our corridors, accomplishes a lot of that. There are areas on sample map 10 where I lean into communities of common interest as a criterion, thinking about our AAPI community and keeping historic Albina together. And there are areas where I lean into the natural boundaries criteria, thinking about what we've discussed here about the West Side District and the Willamette River, and transportation connectivity throughout, not only within each of the districts, but also connecting each of them together. So I think that's just my sort of general approach without repeating what's already been shared here.
Thanks, Commissioner. And Commissioner Van Sickle-Robbins, anything to add?
The only other thing I'd add is that we also looked, in the terms of the difference of those boundaries of that east side to the central east side up in the northern quadrant of that, that the McDaniels high school enrollment area that's a high school enrollment area that has also been ignored for a long time, and so that's one of the reasons why we tried to take the bulk of those neighborhoods that feed into that high school and keep them in a single zone.
Thank you. Commissioners Lumley and Siegel, Hansen, and Buddy. Commissioner Lumley.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that coming into tonight, I was a little concerned about maps 10 and 11B around the Jade District, because I was concerned about how we're going to treat a community of common interest. But since we got that clarification from the Jade District's folks, I'm feeling really confident that we've resolved a lot of those issues. And I see the difference as Commissioner Chisholm had described the difference in the three maps and how we treat the inner east side as sort of a upper, lower, and then a little bit of both. And some of the other differences are in the central districts where you're bordering I-84 and Sandy Boulevard and some of those those neighborhood districts. So I think we're heading in a direction where we could have three maps go forward and just get comments from folks and not feel like we have to get to perfection tonight, because I think we are in a really good direction here. And I just want to thank all of the map makers for what they've produced. I've studied the criteria that we're supposed to follow. I don't see any of them violating any of our criteria. I think we're heading in a good direction. Thank you.
Commissioner Siegel.
Thanks very much. I'll try to keep it brief as well. Chair Lumley, I agree with you completely. I have no problem at all, after 42 years of being in a city planning career, of taking a couple of options out to the public for comment. I agree completely with Commissioner Judd that it would be really appropriate for each of the maps that are taken out before the public, if they were accompanied by a brief and concise, maybe it's an index or whatever, just description of how they address each of the criteria that we said we would follow. I agree with the comments that we've heard from all of our commissioners so far about what we've taken away from the listening sessions, or what many of you have, many of us have heard from different constituent groups that we physically interviewed. And I think that has really helped inform the discussion and has resulted in the modification of the boundaries of a number of these districts. And I encourage us to keep doing that. I do personally think that the Central City 2035 plan and the East Portland plan was the product of many years of public input, public discussion. They've been adopted as public policy. I don't think we should take them lightly. And that's pretty much what I have to say at this point. I'll weigh in on other things later.
Thank you, Commissioner Siegel. Before we go to Co-Chair Hansen, so we will be moving on to live updates. We should probably do that just so that the screen is up and everyone can see what the update is. But we'll start with map 11 because that is the one where we've had an explicit request for changes. But we'll cover each map before we move to votes. Commissioner Hansen and then Baldini.
Oh, perfect. I was going to say, I would also like to see the live update for 10 that includes that 80-second cleaner line. I think that's already in the queue. To Commissioner Siegel's point, yes, we will be putting together the rationale and to have that brief overview of everything. Just to share where I'm kind of feeling and sitting right now, looking at the three, I agree that all three of them as a package could be great. I also think that just narrowing it to 9B and 10 could be a really strong package. The first with the guiding philosophy around neighborhood associations, and the second with like neighborhood boundaries, and the second with sort of the big guiding philosophy around transit and kind of transit corridors. So I think those two as like being significantly different enough from one another as being like a really solid pair. So that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Thank you. And Commissioner Vadini and Commissioner Sexton.
Thank you. I just have two quick points to make. Number one, in response to Commissioner Chisholm highlighting the comments from Eastmoreland residents. Yes, we did get a disproportionately high number of comments from them in the latest round. But as a resident of Selwood Moreland neighborhood, I can tell you what I'm hearing from my neighbors does not match those comments. So I think it's going to be so important for this neighborhood for us to get a really representative sample from this neighborhood to come forward for a public comment and let us know what they're thinking. And as everyone says, you know, we can't make everyone happy, but just hearing from a more representative sample, I think will be really helpful. And the second thing I wanted to note is, you know, clearly I'm a fan of map 9B. But I want to make it clear, I am really a big fan of the Central City Plan 2035 as well. I just think that plan will be best served by having multiple representatives from each district supporting that vision. So it's not that I don't support that Central City Plan, it's that I think it will be better accomplished with more voices and more collaboration rather than centering that plan in really one district and the assets associated with that plan. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we have Commissioner Sexton provide comments, Commissioners Green and Kimura, I don't think we've heard from you this evening. If you did want to weigh in, just to invite you if you have any thoughts before we start to move into live mapping. Commissioner Sexton.
Great, thank you. Yeah, no, I also feel very comfortable moving all three of these, you know, sort of forward to the public to get feedback on them. And I did want to reiterate what Commissioner Bentzicle-Robbins said about Multnomah County District 1, and I put the link to the Multnomah County maps in the chat just so folks can see them. The districts are significantly larger, but District 1 is the entire west side plus the whole east side south of 84 all the way out to about 30th or 33rd Avenue. It kind of zigzags, but it is a very large chunk of the east side. In fact, I think it's like all three of our maps put together basically that are Multnomah County District 1. So that is a thing that does exist.
Thank you. Can I also just say thank you for sharing the links all the time. You've really got your finger on the pulse. Thank you. Commissioner.
I was
Wise
thinking
and
it right
Commissioner
before
Hess.
she said it.
like
What about District 1?
Commissioner Wise and then Commissioner Manhattan.
Yeah. First off, thank you to everyone who has put in effort into the maps, and just for the detail. I think it was super helpful for me just to wrap my mind around the thinking behind all the maps. So thank you so much for that. Yeah, I'm leaning towards us just sending. I think the fewer maps we send, the better. And here's why. I think us being able to work off of even just one map, and kind of starting to edit from there based on comment, would be helpful. It could simplify things in terms of making sure that we're able to get more concise and clean feedback from the public. If I totally understand folks want to have 2 or 3, it's not the hill I will die on, but I think for simplicity's sake, the least amount that we're sending out to the public, the better. At least that's where I'm leaning. I think in terms of my leanings towards maps, I think I'm leaning towards 9B, with the caveat that I think that the J district amendment needs to happen as well for that. But I am interested to hear what folks think about that Sellwood addition, and but I think the map I think gets at a lot of the things that community groups have brought up, and also the conversation around the assets and district / the goods and services conversation that we originally had. Like I think that is I know after that conversation I brought it up a couple times, like, hey, I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose that conversation in this. And so I just I'm trying to strike a balance between all the things that have been presented, and I think that's getting close to that. So so that's what's happening in my brain.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Manhattan, and followed by Commissioner Kimura.
Thank you. I wanted to draw a point. So just coming back to what Commissioner Wise mentioned, I similarly am leaning towards 9B, but appreciate the comment about, or the recommendation from Commissioner Hanson in bringing 10 in as well. If we do move forward with 10, would make a request that, and I half joked about this last time, but did speak to the Rose City Neighborhood Association because I do live in Rose City Park neighborhood, and just would request that that neighborhood not be split across Sandy, because folks, you know, meet on the north side, they live on the south side, and it's, you know, a whole community. I wanted to come back to this point about the county maps and it pulling on the east side, and just to ask the question. I'm wondering actually if Commissioner Baldini just knows this off the top of her head, but I would be curious to hear how many times folks in that county commission district actually elect a representative from the east side. And I don't know the answer to that, but I have not seen that. And I just want to come back to this point around when we're drawing districts around representation and what that means and looks like, and how we support that. And also just want to emphasize what Commissioner Baldini said also about like putting also supportive of the plan that's been referenced multiple times, the 2030 plan, but also appreciate the comment about the collaboration that's going to be needed to put a plan like that into fruition. So, but yeah, just wanted to draw that point because this comes back to this issue around representation that I referenced earlier.
Yeah, I actually work for the county in my day job. Chair Kafori and Commissioner Bailey were both elected from the east side for District 1.
Thank you.
And that's just the recent stuff I have. I don't know historically, but recently those two commissioners were elected from District 1 from the east side.
I think it goes. In Commissioner Kimura, I think you may round us out for this portion of the discussion before we move into live mapping. Commissioner Kimura? You're muted, by the way.
Sorry. Okay. So, see, I have technical issues. The discussion has been fascinating. I will say that in terms of the very subtle differences between the J District piece and the Willamette River West Side, East Side piece, I'm not sure that the general public is going to be able to keep those straight. So I'm with Commissioner Wise in that 2 maps would be good. And is there a way to combine some of them so that each of the pieces get sent out that shows some of those things? The other piece is the question of the east side and the west side with the Willamette River. I don't live there. I don't have as much issues. I agree with Commissioner Laurentiis that the transportation issue is a piece. Also that the whole river frontage becomes a community asset, and are we doing asset packing? That discussion has to happen within the confines of also the people who are going to be affected. I don't want it, but I also don't want to confuse everybody, which I know that people will. If you look at more than 2 and you don't point out the very obvious differences, people will get confused. They'll throw up their hands and say, I don't understand what's going on. So while I think that inherently, I think 3 maps are good, I think we really need to get it down to 2 and listen to the people who are immediately impacted by those decisions, because that's where the changes are going to have to be made. That if it makes sense for us to make the changes, such as at the Rose City Park and the Roseway neighborhoods, do we want to split them up? Well, maybe not. If there is enough comment. The question about the Willamette River being the boundary line, and for the comment about, well, okay, so if the Central City Plan splits it up and some of it works on some of the people are going to be involved are working on the west side and others are going to be on the east side. And maybe that's a good thing, because you have to then figure out which 3 other commissioners need to be part of your buy-off period. So I would say that the hard thing for us is going to be to get it down to 2 maps. And if the group decides that 2 maps are going to move forward, I think that that's really less than confusing because I already heard that from a lot of people. What's the difference? I can't tell the difference. You have to point out the difference. And this is something where I think that it is our charge. If we want comment, we also have to make sure that we get the right comment. I think it has helped that the OPB discussion was that, we have to keep the west side separate and we aren't going to split up the east side neighborhoods. But those kind of things have to go into our discussion here, and those informational pieces need to also be brought up, because I think it's fascinating for people to know that this was not like discussion in a vacuum. I like that map better than this one. This is a very thoughtful process, and I think everybody who has participated has done an excellent job of really thinking about what needs to be said and how it'll impact somebody, because it's going to impact somebody negatively and somebody positively. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Manjarrez, I believe you didn't put your hand down last time. Okay, Commissioner Judd.
Yeah, I think perhaps what we can do if we get down to 2, but yet capture, for example, 9B seems to be the most different than 10 and 11B. So if we were to keep 9B and pick one other, if we were to capture the questions or the differences, capture the questions that we still have in one of those maps, I think that'd be a great idea. For example, just using the summary that Alex sent out of the questions and where the differences, not the question, but the summary of where the differences are. Using neighborhood boundaries, okay, that's cool. That's easy to explain, and citizens can look at that and understand that's what happened there. But then looking at the other 2 points around, okay, do you use Sandy Boulevard or do you look at something different? I think being able to capture those questions with the 2 map presentation will be equally important. I think even if you have 3, you're going to do the same thing. You're still going to have, as Commissioner Hashim was saying, we're still going to develop the differences between all 3 of the maps. Even if you got it down to 2, it would make sense to preserve the differences, the intentional differences between the maps, just so that we can ensure to citizens that, look, we've considered these questions. These are some of the things that we're still struggling with, and take that to the community.
Thank you, Commissioner Judd. So I'm going to reiterate a few things I heard. There is some interest in potentially consolidating at least 2 of the maps to reduce the number of maps that are taken into the next 2 months for review and discussion. Commissioner Chisholm, I know that on map 11, there were basically some specific requests around lines and boundaries for specific maps on the table. And I think we should probably look at those boundaries, because that can help us probably start to coalesce if there's interest in looking at those differences between the maps and the similarities. So maybe we focus on just those, just get the maps cleaned up and in a good place. And we look at considering the maps. So there are a couple of ways we can approach this. You can vote on, we are planning to vote on each map. You do not have to vote in affirmatively for any map, right? You can vote affirmatively in opposition, or you can abstain. We can also have a process if there is a motion on the table to withdraw a particular map for consideration, or to specifically focus on consolidating 2 specific maps. And I don't want to presume which ones. So let's start with map 11. Let's do the live updates. We'll go to each map in reverse order: 9, or sorry, 11B, 10, and 9B. And we'll just make sure that those lines are in the right places for full consideration. So, Alex.
Can I just do a quick process
Sure.
check?
Sure.
We haven't had a break yet, and it might be good if we could just quickly go through what the map iterations were. That would give Alex some time to make some changes. Unfortunately, Alex will get a break though.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Commissioner Hanson.
I was actually going to agree with Commissioner Lumley, and to reflect back what I had heard, I believe in terms of the requested changes that I had heard so far for Alex to make it was just on map 10 and 11B to update that line on 82nd for the Jade boundary. I don't know if there were any other additions. I think my pretty strong recommendation is to not wait into map consolidation at this point, because I feel like trying to combine any of these maps would actually maybe open kind of a can of worms. I'm seeing some nods. So my recommendation would be to kind of move forward with the updated, have the conversation be about the 9B, 10 with 82nd as a line, and 11B with 82nd as a line.
And there's also, there was also Commissioner Vincent Robbins, you also had a request too. Did you want to articulate that?
Well, I was just going to suggest, because we've had all kinds of conversation over multiple meetings about where are the boundaries of the Jade District and that we really want to focus on. And on 9B, I had moved the northern boundary up to Division, but it could go higher to match with where it was on the other two maps, which I think was somewhere between Mill and Market, or generally speaking. So I don't think that would have make a dramatic difference to the population balancing.
And those are probably the kind of similarities that I was kind of thinking in terms of kind of consolidating, getting the maps more consistent. If you can't reconcile some of the larger questions. And Commissioner Manadas.
Yeah, just another process point too. I had requested at the beginning that we not do the motions around what to take off the table. It just gets really confusing whether we're moving an affirmative or what we're taking off. And if we can go each map, again, I understand there's going to be some changes or tweaks that are made to current maps, but have folks basically decide map by map what we're going to move forward. And if folks want to move forward with two, maybe a majority doesn't vote for a particular map. So just keeping the process consistent, because for me, it gets a little bit confusing when we kind of move between two different processes for that. Also feel like opening up the consolidation and making this a work group meeting in that sense would open a can of worms, because personally, it might affect my willingness to support a map moving forward. And I feel like we're already making tweaks at the edges.
And again, as a clarification, that was to honor if the group was deciding that it was seeing enough similarities and wanted to focus on consolidating the maps and specifically removing one from contention, to basically focus the votes on a revised map that potentially takes in certain elements of others, not actually removing it off the table as much as like formally figuring out a way to merge the maps for consideration, if that was feasible. But I think your point is well taken. And Commissioner Lumley.
Yes, thank you. And I agree that we should be voting on maps affirmatively. I didn't hear any changes to map 9B, so that could be a vote.
There is, I'm sorry to interrupt. There is one on 9B. It's to move up
okay.
the Jade District border.
Oh, okay. So we'll call that. Has there ever been a 9C? Can we call it 9C, the new map 9C? And then with the map 10 moving, adjusting the J District, can we call that one 10C? And on map 11, with the clarification on J District, can we call that 11C? So they all be 9C, 10C, and 11C. And I'd recommend, just, if people want to look at some maps in real time after the break, that'd be fine. But we could also vote on each one of those independently.
How about we
take a break?
Unless there are any requests, yeah, how about we take a break? We come back, we just review those, see the updated versions, and then we can move forward with those votes if everything's good.
Great.
See you
So
back here.
5 minutes is what, 8:15?
Yep.
Awesome.
8:15. Okay, we're coming back. So, wait for folks to join. Just want to make sure we do have a quorum and are ready to get going. Perfect. Okay, so I connected with the co-chairs during the break, and because there are multiple proposals for just line adjustments that have already been on the table, we're going to do it in order that we presented the maps, and then we'll ultimately vote in that order too, just so it's easier to follow. So Alex, if you are ready, we'll start with the adjustments to map 9B, which should now become map 9C.
Yeah, I started kind of in the background as an official capacity, but I think it's also probably worthwhile for me to show my screen and use Districtr so you guys can all see me actively making the change so we can all
Perfect.
follow along. So let me get that loaded up.
And then if there are questions about specific lines, or if you'd like to zoom in and focus on any area that's in question or confusing, just please raise your hand to indicate the question.
Yeah, so I'm opening 9B right now to start with. And
great.
I think the idea was that we were talking about making this boundary here for the Green District, East Side District, extend north from Division up to follow the other boundaries that the Jade kind of larger interpretation, the Jade District extended north of Division to kind of follow Mill and Market. So to do that, I'm just going to erase a few of these. Actually, I'll just paint them green so that these ones will match. So it'll be something like that. Pretty simple change. It's not gonna, I can run the numbers in the background. It will take me just a little extra time, but you can see from here that it does not change the population deviation much. So still well below 10%, I would guess below 5% for overall deviation.
Right. And Alex, just for clarity, can you just say where that northern border is now sitting to reflect the expanded Jade District?
Yep. Let me open this up and I will just double check in real time that it's going to match 11B because it's already using that boundary. So that one actually uses Mill. So yeah, let me just make that slight adjustment here. All right, so that's going to use Market as it crosses 205, and then it then jogs down to Mill on 92nd. So that is going to match. We'll jump over here to 11B, same north boundary. So Market until 92nd, and then Mill to 82nd.
Any issues with that adjustment to reflect the kind of revised thinking around the Jade District? And noting that that eastern border is now aligned with 82nd. Sorry, that the border separating east and west is now aligned with 82nd. Great. Any other proposed changes to 9B? Okay. So I think we have map 9C if there are no other changes.
Could you zoom in on the northern line there? Is that
Between
Mill
the
or
green?
Market? Yeah,
Yep,
right there.
it's Market, and then this is, I know it's hard to see without kind of a nice background, but this is 205, so it's Market, and then when you get to 92nd, it goes down to Mill.
Thank you.
Are we ready for map 10? Okay, seeing no opposition, we'll go to map 10.
We're gonna do the same thing. Sorry, we're doing a little bit different here. We already have a different north boundary, which we might want to discuss here, which is running along Stark. But the main thing we wanted to change in this map is to use 82nd as a boundary, so it does not include these census blocks to the west. So I will change those to the teal district right now. Right, we see how it changed the deviation a little bit, but we're still sitting well below 10%, likely below 5%. So now it's using 82nd as a boundary, starting at start, and this is based on the original sample map 10.
And where's that northern boundary?
This, sorry,
Right
between
there,
the,
yeah.
right here, this is using Stark.
Okay. And I think we are interested in making these boundaries consistent between maps 9 through 11. So can we use the same boundaries? Yeah, I'm seeing some thumbs up and head nods. Commissioner Lumley, did you have anything to add? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I'm open to either way, but if we did show a map with a slightly different boundary for the J district, it might be good to get comments from the folks in that area to see how they feel about that. I guess I'm supportive of leaving it the way it is, but if people want to make all the maps the same too, that's fine also.
Oh, no, you're on.
Sorry, is there a motion?
Are we doing motions now?
For mapping, so if there is no, there's no proposal to change the line. I saw both head nods and also a request to not change the line. So just so Alex has clear direction. And Commissioner Manhattan.
Oh, I'll let you finish your thought on that. Sorry.
Did we
So-
vote on map 9C already? Was that considered a vote?
It was not considered a vote. It was
Okay.
more of like, are these lines the lines that will ultimately be reflected? So.
Yeah,
let me
I'm
say
sorry.
this.
I heard the motion. It was just going to request if we could focus in on the line changes. And I know there were line requests for that the map makers had for the specific maps. I will say, just, you know, my opinion is that consistency on some of these districts for folks to give feedback to will make our lives easier later. So folks aren't, you know, if it's like if it's a tweak over, it's I think we might get mixed feedback that will be confusing to decipher later. So that might be helpful just to have folks give feedback on one version of those different areas. So it was just on that point, but is on each of these, are we able to make any requests for folks who are not the map makers about specific tweaks on this? Because for this one, for example, my request would be around the Rose City Park neighborhood to like follow the neighborhood maps, and that looks sort of like the one in the next in 11, I think. But I'm not sure if we're making those kinds of changes or tweaks to some of these maps. And I offer that because I know it would be pretty subtle, so I just want to put it out there.
And Commissioner Manetta, do you mean to follow the neighborhood boundaries instead of using Sandy as the primary?
Yeah,
divider?
just in that area around Holly. Again, I know it will tweak the population, but my sense is it won't be so significant. But again, I just put it on the table for as an offer to the map maker. If they say no, that's significant, then I'll take it off.
So Commissioner Lumley, did you want to weigh in on this point or this question?
Yeah, I think Commissioner Manwars makes a good point about the three maps being the same for the J district, but I'll leave it up to others to comment on her second point about the, is it the Rose City Park area?
Commissioner Hanson?
Yeah, I think to the Rose City Park comment, since the guiding philosophy of this map is to prioritize transit corridors over neighborhood boundaries, and that's like pretty explicit, my sense on my leaning on this one would be to keep Sandy as the dividing line, understanding that there are many neighborhoods in this map that are actually divided, and that's like part of the kind of philosophical question that we want to get feedback on. So that's my just personal opinion on that. The one other suggestion for an edit that I have is I can't remember if Commissioner Lorente had said that there was desire to have 12th, I believe, in sort of the central east side be a cleaner line between the blue and the teal. But that was the one other potential change I wanted to flag here.
Commissioner Lorente?
Yeah, I would agree with Commissioner Hanson. I think the value here, I think this exercise is kind of cleaning up some of these boundaries. So yes, like making a straight line down 82nd makes sense. And yes, also cleaning up the central east side industrial boundary to go straight down 12th. I'm open to, but I think there will be value in sort of contrasting the sort of neighborhood association boundary versus transit corridor distinction. I think is a valuable one for us to get feedback on. So I would be in favor of us cleaning up those two lines to the east and the west and maybe getting feedback on that boundary to the north.
Commissioner Fleischman?
I want to return to the question of drawing the line for the J district because it doesn't seem like it's been resolved. And I've heard folks on both sides saying maybe it's good to keep this map the way it is to get some conversation around where that line might be drawn and the other side around creating consistency across three maps and essentially, or two maps or whatever we get to, and thereby eliminating that conversation around where that ought to be by kind of making a choice and then hearing what the reaction is. I'm in favor of making the maps consistent regarding the boundary of the J district, which would mean moving the line, the shaded line, teal line further south for the reason that it will, I think, reflect the so far expressed will that the J district be recognized with a kind of a slightly expanded boundaries, but also recognizing the desire of perhaps the desire of the Montevilla neighborhood to have more of it included in the same district. So if I need to make a motion that we move the line, I will do so, but if there's enough head nods, maybe we don't need a motion.
Let's do it this way. Is there any, and Commissioners Lorente and Fleischman, do you mind lowering your hands? Unless Commissioner Lorente, you were trying to jump in. Okay. Is there currently any opposition to aligning the districts, the J district boundaries, to be consistent with what we established in map 9, now 9C? You can raise your hand. Okay, I'm not seeing any opposition, so we'll make that adjustment, Alex. And yeah, that goes down to mill, mark it in mill.
Mm-hmm. This now matches. Yep.
Okay. And then on this map, so this is now map 10C. We'll update the names in a bit, and we'll talk about the naming conventions as well at the end. But are there any other boundaries that the group kind of feels needs to be adjusted before this map can be considered. Commissioner Lumley.
Yeah, I heard a comment earlier about using 12th Avenue as a border, which traveling that area does feel like a transit corridor. I'm just curious how Commissioner Lorente felt about that.
Saw a thumbs
I'm
up on
open.
that one.
Yep. I'm open to adjusting the line to run straight down 12.
All right. So,
Not seeing any opposition to that either.
so with that, I will add the Teal district is already using 12 right here, but we're just going to continue that south and get these new census blocks that are currently on the east side of 12. And then I have a question for y'all about these new census blocks that are on the west side of 12 in Teal. So this is the boundary between Ladd's Addition. It might make sense to align those along 12 as well.
Seeing head nods. No opposition. Okay, perfect. And lots of thumbs up. And then Alex, could you, when you've done this portion, would you also be able to zoom out of the map? Just so we can kind of see the final view.
Of course. Turn off the neighborhoods just for clarity unless you need one going down.
Okay. Any other adjustments to this map? Okay, and we'll move on to 11B, which will become 11C, the updated version.
So
And
that is
So sorry.
the change that has 82nd, the boundaries. So it's just moving these few census blocks that are on the west side of 82nd to be part of the Teal district. Just like that.
Okay, so Commissioner Hanson.
I'm just noticing a pretty significant population difference in this one, from a low of 159 to a high of 167. I don't know if there are any recommendations kind of off the top of anyone's head, maybe like over towards like Laurelhurst to even that out a little bit, or if it's like good enough numbers wise. I guess actually maybe not for like neighborhood association reasons, but that was just a flag that I had on this one.
It's a good point, and Commissioner Tism commented on it in the original, map 11, the blue extended into Sunnyside a little bit, and the work that Flo did to kind of just to make slight adjustments to 11 was to use the neighborhood boundaries, and that's why that decision was made. But it did, like you mentioned, increase the deviation slightly.
And Alex, I'm doing math on the fly, but I don't
Yeah.
believe it's outside of the acceptable margin. Is that correct?
That's correct. Well, I can tell you as well. I do that quick math. So I'm not running the full numbers, but
Hey, it's Kari. I was disconnected for a few minutes there.
it's still going to be
Looks like-
about 5% or so. So yeah, it's still, the others are about 4.5%. So within
Okay.
1% of each other. Yeah.
That sounds good then. Thank you.
Commissioner Chisholm, were you trying to, I know that you reconnected, were you also trying to weigh in?
I just want to know what changes we've made, if any.
Yes, so the changes have been aligning we're on map 11, now C. So aligning the boundaries with the Day district that were established in 9C and then 10C. So that's now consistent. So that meant moving the border, I believe, a bit south. Oh, no, wait, it's just taking some of the edge off of the western side on this map. And then there was a slight adjustment we're on map 11. So I think that was the only change on this one.
That's correct. The
Alex,
only
okay.
change was making 82nd the boundary between the districts. So moving those few census blocks, over to the Teal district.
Great.
Great, thank
And
you.
I don't, Okay, perfect. Okay, any other adjustments to this map? Okay, and I think we're feeling okay about the deviation at this point in the process. Okay. And Commissioner Manhattan. You're on mute.
Just asking quickly for clarification on the point of view of this map. Just, we may have said it and I may have missed it, but the first one, it sounds like, is really around the neighborhood boundaries. The second one was around transportation. So what is the distinction here?
Yeah, as I said earlier, primarily it's about the Central City 2035 plan and ensuring that we have a commission that is holding the city accountable for executing that plan, for driving the investment that is required to rebuild our urban core. That includes, and that urban core includes the parts west of the river and the parts east of the river in that, what is on here, blue zone, as well as the and extending up Sandy Boulevard and in keeping Buckman and Kearns neighborhoods whole, and pairing the renter-centric census blocks in Buckman and Kearns with the renter-centric blocks in Goose Hollow, downtown, South Waterfront, University, and so forth.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any other adjustments to lines? Or do we have the final maps to then move forward with votes? And just 1 second. Commissioner Lumley is has to leave, is having technical issues, has to leave and come back. So we'll hold off on the voting. But what we'll do is we'll use modified consensus in our voting. We'll go in order. So we'll start with what is now 9C, the updated map that you've seen. If there is no opposition, as usual, if there's no opposition to affirmatively moving the map forward for consideration, we'll move to the next. If there is, if there is opposition, we will move to a roll call vote. That's consistent with the bylaws. Commissioner Fleischman.
Yes, thank you. I'm wondering around, we've had two conversations. One of them is about the individual maps, and then the second one is the strategy of moving forward and how many maps we should move forward. And those seem to be contingent decisions in some way, where, at least in my mind, knowing how many maps we're going to move forward would influence how I think about the maps, because I think all three have a lot of really good things to offer and will elicit a lot of conversation. But Commissioner Weiss and others have suggested that perhaps 2 might be a magic number. Commissioner Kimura made, I think, the same point. So I'm wondering about kind of the order of decision making and whether we decide on the number of maps we want to carry forward and then on the maps, or we're going to let that emerge through the process of kind of voting on the individual maps. It's just I'm wondering out loud. My preference would be to settle on the number of maps we're going to carry forward, and then kind of decide what those maps might be.
So we do have a proposal on the table, so we can talk about it. Commissioner Judd, I know you would you like to jump in?
Yeah. In order to vote on a number, is that I'm still not sure there's a significant difference across all of the maps, I guess. And so, for example, one of the things that Kari just said is that the central business district is the single thread in his, but Commissioner Lorentes has a part of the central business district. Is there a big enough distinction between the two now? And I'm sorry, I couldn't track the shapings of them to really understand if there was a big difference.
So in terms of the actual geographic boundaries, the primary difference is that in the map 10, or sorry, in map 11C, the central district, that the district that is furthest west extends further east. Whereas in the map 10C, that district that is further west does not extend as far east, but does extend further east along a more consistent a more consistent border or boundary. So,
Gotcha. So if I could ask, Kari, like, is that a significant difference in your mind?
I see we have some other differences, in particular up in the Sandy Boulevard, Rose City Park area, that I do think are worthy of public discussion. But as for the west side, I do see 10C as being something of a compromise choice between 9C and 11C. I do think they're meaningfully different, though, in terms of a strategy. Yeah, I guess I wonder if we should, to Commissioner Fleischman's point, perhaps we ought to entertain a motion from someone to just move all three forward into the public hearings and be done for the day.
Commissioner Fleischman, was that your point?
No, it wasn't. My point was, my preference was to move to, because I, not only on my own thinking, but I heard Commissioner Weiss and Commissioner Kimura make the point that contrast is good, but too many choices might make things more difficult in terms of the choice process. So I would be open to a motion to move two forward and to keep the third one as an alternative, because my guess is that 9C is going to move forward, and that what we're talking about right now is the desirability of moving forward with 10C or 11C. So that's a clarification I have not made the motion, so I'm looking to the facilitator. I saw it pop up in the chat that there was a suggested motion, but I'd be glad to make it if you think it's in order. But it looks like there's a number of commissioners that want to weigh in first.
So just in terms of the process, the filtering can happen naturally with the vote, but in order for that to happen, there has to be some level of opposition to certain plans, right? If the natural intent is to only select 2 out of the 3, if we were to move motions forward, like if we were to vote on kind of combinations, that would have a large number of permutations, right? You have to say map 9 and 11 or not 9 and 10, right? So most naturally, if there are 1 or 2 maps that commissioners feel most strongly about, you could vote affirmatively and on those maps and not and vote in opposition or abstain from votes on others, right? That mathematically could work. Other than that, yeah.
Autumn, I understand that, but it doesn't clarify the intent of the number by doing it in sequence. So this is, to me, it feels a little bit like the votes that we took on motions that Commissioner Lumley forwarded the last time, that helped us clarify kind of what was and what wasn't on the table moving forward. But again, I bow to whatever the best group process is.
So let's, if you can briefly, we have about 15 minutes left on this meeting. Could we hear comments from Commissioner Lumley, then Manjarrez, Siegel, and Weiss?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, good. I think we should not try to do votes on the number because we're just going to end up having a debate about which maps. I think we should just take them one at a time in the order they were presented tonight, 9C, 10C, and 11C. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Manadas.
Yeah, I think for like just a process check here too, I agree. I think having too many confusing votes will just like force a series of votes, another set of votes. But I hear Commissioner Fleischman in terms of wanting sort of an indication or temperature check from folks. So I don't think it has to be as formal as a vote, but maybe there's sort of a temperature check kind of question that can be put out there. For example, I don't intend to vote forward more than 2 maps personally. Again, I can't control what the rest of the group decides they want to do. My preference would be to have a limited number. But I think asking the question of like might help folks delineate in their mind how they want to vote versus like locking us into a series of other votes. So temperature check sort of type question before we get into each piece so that folks can decide accordingly how they want to vote might be helpful.
And thank you, Commissioner Manadas. I think this is your temperature check, just so we're all clear, right? And we've heard a number of different things on the table from everything from 1, 2, and 3 maps, which is why I think like you're having the discussion now, but I think it is that idea of recognizing that your votes will ultimately determine how many maps move forward. Commissioner Siegel and then Commissioner Wise.
Okay, briefly, thank you very much, Harun. I think we underestimate the intelligence and capacity of the public to take a look at a couple different options and ask questions and express opinions. And I would be glad to make a motion that we forward 3 maps for consideration at the public hearings. Do what you will with this. Thank you.
Was that a motion?
It was a motion.
I'll second that.
I'm against.
So I will share. So as the first established process, so we did say that in the interest of transparency, so that we're clear on what we were voting on, we did establish as a process that we would vote on the maps individually. There is a motion, however, there is a formal motion on the table to overturn that established process, and there is a second. So we will take a vote on it in accordance with the bylaws. Okay, is there any opposition? And Commissioner Manjarrez, I think I heard you. Okay, so I'm going to restate the motion and note the opposition. So the motion on the table is that we vote to move all 3 of the current maps under consideration, 9C, 10C, and 11C, forward to vote as a package. And there's opposition. So we will take a roll call vote. Give me 1 second. And the alternative is to vote on the maps individually at this point. Commissioner Manjarrez.
Oh,
formal
no.
vote. Yeah. Commissioner Kimura.
Yes.
Commissioner Siegel.
Yes.
Commissioner Judd.
Yes.
Commissioner Lorente.
Yes.
Commissioner Chisholm.
Yes.
Commissioner Wise.
No.
Commissioner Valdini.
No.
Commissioner Saxena.
Yes.
Co-Chair Lumley.
Yes.
Commissioner Green.
Yes.
Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins.
No.
Commissioner Fleischman.
No.
The motion does carry on a tally 8-5. Okay. So you've approved all of the maps. They will go to the public and be presented by the end of this week. And there'll be a month approximately for the community to have them in discussion and then to ultimately weigh in more explicitly during the public hearing schedule in the first half of July. Commissioner Siegel, I think your hand was already up.
I just have to take it down. Thank you.
Okay. Co-Chair Lumley. And then Kimura.
Thank you. Staff are preparing a packet to go out to the public, which also includes the rationales for each of the maps. And so at some point, between now and Friday morning, we're going to have to get that tightened up. And Commissioner Hanson, I believe you might have a recommended process. Is that correct?
Yes, I am going to actually let Autumn close this voting portion of the conversation, and then we're going to shift to next steps. Autumn, you're muted.
So we have closed the vote. However, Commissioner Kimura and Fleischman, did you have questions or anything that you needed to state? Commissioner Kimura?
I will take my hand down after I finish. I hope that the comments that were made regarding the individual maps would also be presented in doing the here are the maps, because I think the public needs to hear the very thoughtful discussion given by all of us on each of the different pieces. And it's probably going to be the same, oh, I should have thought about it, or I did think about that, because that makes, to me, more of an effect than just saying, well, here it is. And there's no way for the public generally to understand, unless they have come to these meetings, how we got to our decision. I was actually for only 2 going forward, but I think the discussion in the fullness of having the discussion needs to be the 3 maps going forward. And I think the Portland public can deal with this, although you might not like all of the answers, but I think we should at least consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll have a presentation on the community engagement outreach and the process there, but there will be rationale and synthesis that will strive to reflect all of the discourse and deliberation that the body did, but also how you arrived at these various maps. And Commissioner Fleischman.
Yeah, despite the fact that I voted no, that vote didn't reflect my judgment about the quality of the 3 maps. I think they're excellent solutions. I wanted to reflect that, and I believe that we were voting based on kind of a decision-making strategy moving forward. And I just want that to be reflected, because this was the biggest division I think we've had in terms of a formal division in the commission. And I wouldn't want this vote to be interpreted as anything other than us trying to puzzle our way through how to best move forward the process. So I wanted to just make sure that was captured.
Thanks, Commissioner. And Commissioner Manhattan.
I just want to make a comment about the change in process that continues to happen in the middle of the meeting, and just figure out for the incoming chairs if we can find a way to reconcile the situation around transparency. And there's, for example, a comment in the chat from the public about posting the maps as we vote. And again, as we continue to use this motion approach, and I understand it's in the bylaws, so that's totally fine. But I think out of respect for the process, I would request that we can outline the process at the beginning and commit to that, and not use it as a strategic way to move things forward. It feels like a little bit of railroading that's happening, and it's incredibly frustrating. So that's going to be my request for the incoming chairs.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I will note that the bylaws, they are public, but as one of the things we discussed earlier too, they also can be amended as well. So that could be something that the commission takes up. I know that we're towards the end here, and we did adjust the agenda, and so we don't have the full time allotted for the discussion around community engagement. There's a community engagement work group that can dial in, but we did want to share the current approach and the thinking, the current plans. So Co-Chair Hansen.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Autumn. And if I could get the values slide up on the screen. And while that is happening, just I think such deep gratitude and appreciation for the conversation this evening, both in terms of content and also full of process in terms of process. And as I said at the top of the call, I think this is really an opportunity now that we have narrowed to these 3 maps to really start to think about anything that feels sticky, anything that is feeling unaddressed, anything that is feeling, like we still really want to dig into. Now is the moment to sort of expand again and like really focus on what feedback we want, who we want to hear from, what sort of questions we have been grappling with and want answered ourselves. So we're gonna, Sophia and I, this will likely go probably 5 or 10 minutes over the 9 o'clock hour. So I appreciate folks' attention for just a couple more minutes so that we can talk about community engagement and next steps, because this is really the moment where a lot of this starts to come together and we get to share out. So as we dive into next steps in community engagement, Co-Chair Lumley and I also wanted to just take an opportunity to revisit the values that we as a collective decided on a couple of months ago. So I'll just give folks a moment to skim through what we've got on the screen here. In terms of communication, equity, fiscal responsibility, transparency, accountability, collaboration, and anti-racism. Commissioner Manjarrez just a moment ago made a process recommendation for that is tied to values, right? So this is really a moment of reflection for all of us to think about, how have we really actively prioritized these values and what opportunities do we have going forward as we enter this community engagement process to really be purposeful and intentional in like continuing to live our values meaningfully as a commission. So thinking about the public hearings this summer, the purpose of these public hearings is to meet people where they are and gather community feedback on the draft maps that will inform one final map that we will get to by the end of August. And in terms of the desired outcomes for these hearings, we have gathered a lot of feedback already. We have tried to engage communities who haven't been part of processes historically, and there's a lot more work to do. So we really, with these hearings, want to engage communities we haven't yet heard from, and as an outcome, also want all Portlanders to have the opportunity to be involved in the process and give feedback. And then as a last and final outcome of these public hearings, wanting it to be an opportunity to live our values. Like we've said this whole time that yes, having a really solid map at the end is important, and having a deeply community-driven and responsive and equitable process is just as important as that final map that we agree on. So we will have a follow-up community engagement working group. You will all be asked going forward to engage in various ways this summer, so stay tuned. Sophia will talk about that a little bit more. But for the conversation tonight, we just wanted to reground in the values and also talk about those outcomes. So Sophia, I will pass it over to you, and then I know you'll pass it over to me for a couple of next steps on mapping or map next steps. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Hansen. So I will kind of walk through this pretty fast, but we'll follow up via email with all this information, as Commissioner Hansen said, and then as well, we'll touch base on it more in the community engagement work group. So for our public hearings, just to remind folks, these will be hybrid hearings. We'll have a virtual and in-person component. Right now that we have maps for public hearing, we'll start honing down the location. So that's TBD. We will be recording and posting the hearings on our website. So if for some reason you can't join all the hearings, you will have those available. We'll have for accessibility, ASL and Spanish interpretation at all the hearings. And then any additional request will just have to come to us and we'll accommodate that. We'll try to find locations near transit so folks can join. For the educational materials, we're planning on having a presentation and a fact sheet that will be translated. And then we'll have print maps. We'll have some 11 by 17 and some large 2 to 3 feet maps for the public to come in person and look at them. We'll also have blank maps for folks that want to draw their own district map there, as well as comment forms for written comments. For commissioner attendance, we're asking that commissioners attend a minimum of 4 public hearings, and we'll have a sign up process where you can sign up to and let us know what hearings you plan on attending. Of course, you can come to all of them, but at least 4. And what we'll do with that is that we may ask you to play a role during the hearing. So that may be, for example, giving the educational presentation, maybe sharing some opening or closing remarks, or helping welcome folks, etc. The agenda of the public hearing will be fleshed out by the community engagement work group. On the screen, you can see just a screenshot of the fact sheet, so the back and the front, and then one of the ads that we'll do, which I'll talk to about now, which is our public hearing outreach. So we hope to have a really robust outreach process in June and in July to ensure that folks join our hearings. So we are working on having a printed mailer. So every Portlander will receive a 6x11 mailer. You can see it on the screen there. I've just sent a copy of this mailer to the community engagement work group so that they can send us any feedback or revisions, but those will come out towards the end of June, so right before the hearings. We'll do paid advertisements in the Willamette Weekly, Portland Mercury, El Latino Hoy, Asian Reporter, Portland Servers, and then looking at a few community newspapers as well. We'll have an outreach flyers, do email blasts, social media posts, and of course, traditional press releases, public notices, and then do targeted community partner outreach. And then all these things will compile it into a community outreach toolkit that we can share with folks and specifically you all to help us do outreach for the public hearings. So you'll have a lot of information and materials coming to your inboxes. So you're not off the hook yet. We really do need your help in helping us do outreach for these public hearings. I think that's it. I could take some quick questions. If not, always available via email.
Reiterating, any questions on what you've heard or any brief feedback to give to the staff kind of outside of email? And Commissioner Chisholm.
On the public hearing outreach, will there be any paid digital advertising?
Yes, that's what I did directly put it on there, but thought about doing our paid social media and then also paid digital ads on newspaper outlets, if that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, great. And as I think you know,
Commissioner Chisholm, your audio is cutting out. I'm going to give it one more shot. Okay, if Commissioner Chisholm reconnects, we'll circle back. Commissioner Judd?
Yeah, will we be able to put advertisements in public transportation?
I think we can look at that now that we have all these materials are kind of created. So I think that if you all as a community engagement work group decide and we have the funds available, I think we can do that.
And as a plug for the community engagement work group, it is not a closed group. It is accepting additional members all the time, and it is a blast. I've seen it myself. All right.
I was going to jump in, Autumn, and actually say exactly the same thing. If there are no additional comments, I'll share a couple next steps, and then Co-Chair Lumley will close us out with a few additional commission next steps. Hearing none. Open invitation to come to the community engagement work group, especially if you are interested in revisiting these juicy questions that we have come back to time and again that we will be posing to the community, or if you're interested in talking through outreach, it's going to be a really important and robust conversation. So we will be moving for Adam, I believe, will be moving forward on scheduling that. In terms of next steps for the maps themselves, based on so map rationales have been submitted by the folks who had initially drafted them, in addition to the very robust conversations during the calls. So I will be taking a stab at like synthesizing all of that so that there is also consistency among the 3 map rationales and some sort of overarching comments as there are commonalities among the 3, and then highlighting the differences. Since we are in a pretty quick turnaround of getting this all out this week, the rough plan is for me to send that out early tomorrow morning. I believe Sophia and Co-Chair Lumley, we had decided to circulate that just to all the commissioners, so everybody gets a chance to look at it tomorrow morning. Please reply directly with feedback if there's anything that is like outstandingly wrong. It will be a quick turnaround. Our request is by about 4 p.m. tomorrow. So I'll try to get it out by 9 a.m. just so folks have most of the day. It should be simple and straightforward based on what we've talked about, but just to sort of bottom line that rationale. And then the last thing that I will share, Commissioner Van Sickle-Robbins, we've not scheduled it yet, but it will likely be sometime in June. We'll try to have some extra lead time for that. And then the one additional thing that Co-Chair Lumley and I had wanted to share is we've been advised by Flow Analytics that we need to both label the districts themselves and then also the 3 draft maps that we have. So our recommendation was going to be, we didn't want to do numbers, but perhaps thinking about having consistency across the 3 maps, using District A, District B, District C, and District D, starting like doing it clockwise. So like starting at the top and moving clockwise. So just as like holding for now, so that if folks are looking at different maps, they can talk about District B in this map versus that map. And then we had talked about labeling the 3 maps. We like brainstormed a whole bunch of ideas, but what we kind of settled on was maybe using 3 trees from the Pacific Northwest. So like the alder map, the cedar map, and the maple map, for example, as options. So unless there are any better ideas, or objections, we will move forward with that as like just again, so there is consistency in shared language over the summer. Hearing no better ideas, we had some fun ones. I will pass it over to Co-Chair Lumley to close us out with additional next steps, which I believe are also on the slide.
Well, excellent, thank you. So our next commission meeting will reconvene at our first public hearing on July 5th. The community engagement group will meet sometime in the next 2 weeks, as Commissioner Hanson has said, to flesh out the remainder of the public hearing details. And as always, the commissioners are welcome to join in these meetings. Staff are following up with additional hearing information by email, so please be sure to check your email. Attend the hearings and promote the hearings wherever you can. And just as a few closing remarks, the timeline for getting this work done is very strict and very short. And I think we have been doing the best we can. We simply didn't have an opportunity for doing another meeting. So tonight was the night. We are moving a set of maps forward for public comment. For that, we are on schedule. I want to thank you all and congratulations for achieving another milestone for the Independent District Commission. Thank you. We are adjourned.
Thank you, everyone. Congratulations too.
Thank you.
We'll all have dinner at some point.